Just before we begin this week, this is a long show for a long holiday weekend. You've got chapters. I would recommend you use them. It's Friday, the 18th of April, 2025.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of True Fans.
I really think we can change this conversation to talk about how video is an optional and additive layer.
Spotify's Maya Prohovnik on video in Spotify. Plus,
SPC stands for Standard Podcast Consumption.
John Spurl talks about sharing the data from podcast apps. And
it was an event, and they want it to be with other podcast listeners.
Dino Sophos on the Crosswires Podcast Festival. Also in the chapters today, YouTube's new AI tools for video and podcasts, Spotify investing over $1 million to grow its catalogue of non-English audiobooks in Europe, and women's podcast listenership has tripled in 10 years. This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout with the tools, support and community to ensure you keep podcasting. Start podcasting, keep podcasting with Buzzsprout.com.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
James, let's kick the show off then. Right, who said this, James? No clear audience gain, unvetted, untested and unproven proprietary metrics. Sounds pretty heavy. Who said that?
Yeah, and it was a pretty heavy piece. This was Sounds Profitable's Brian Barletta writing a piece on video on Spotify, and he went on to say, in its current state, I urge the podcast industry not to take part in Spotify video and streaming audio as it stands, to have a massive and long-term and streaming audio as it stands to have a massive and long-term negative revenue and reputational impact for those involved. Crikey, he didn't really hold back, did he, in terms of some of the claims that he was making in that piece. Did you get to read it, Sam?
I did, yeah. And basically, it's not got any splinters in his backside, has he? He's not sitting on the fence on this one.
No.
Now, why has Brian come out with this sort of really critical statement of Spotify? What's irked him?
I think he's been nervous about Spotify and video for some time. It's not always been the most clear thing that when you upload, for example, when you upload video to Spotify, then it'll use the audio from that video file for everyone, regardless of whether or not they listen on video or on audio. There's a bunch of information there, which, clearly is something that needs to be clear. But I think it's also, it shows the nervousness, I think, that there is, particularly in the advertising community, around video, because video in both Spotify and in YouTube does break quite a lot of the ways that we earn money from podcasting. And I think, Brian's piece is very emblematic of that actually, there is real nervousness out there.
You say we, who's the royal we? Because clearly if you're a creator on YouTube and Spotify, you're still earning revenue. So who's the royal we who's not earning revenue?
So, the royal we who's not earning revenue is if you are using, for example, programmatic advertising. So if you have ads that you say will be back for a break, and then in different parts of the world, people hear different advertising, which somebody is going to tell me is not programmatic, but it's dynamic or whatever that type of advertising is. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If you're using that type of advertising, which I'm going to call programmatic just for fun, targeted advertising perhaps, then all of that goes away if you're on Spotify and you're using video. And all that, by the way, goes away if you're on YouTube as well. Brian also points out that you lose analytics and attribution prefix URLs. And there is also a bit of a sticky thing in terms of revenue when you're looking at IAB certified downloads, which Spotify doesn't provide you with, versus obviously the IAB certified downloads, which you might get from your own podcast hosting company. So there's a bit of a concern there, I think, from Brian, but it's most definitely a very combative article.
Now, look, I did look at my podcast tab within my Spotify app. And actually, I have to be honest and say, James, it is super cool. As somebody who builds an app and who has a UI, the way they've implemented the integration between audio and video. So when you scroll down, it's a very much a single column. You get the cover art. But if there is a video element to that podcast, it bleeds the video straight through. So you're watching the video trailer or you're watching the start of the video, and then you can keep scrolling down. And if it's just audio, it'll play in audio. And I think the speed of the way that the video bleeds through, I think the way that the UI for the customer works is really cool. And that may be because they do require you to upload the video to their servers and their CDN, which they can serve, as opposed to relying on it coming from a third-party host.
Yes, I agree. And I think that there is definite benefits in terms of user experience in the way that Spotify does video to the way that other independent podcast platforms do video, of grabbing it from the individual podcast host in varying qualities and in codecs as well. So I think Spotify is actually focusing on the audience, and I think quite a lot of the conversation that we hear in the podcast space is people focusing a little bit too much on the business and focusing a little bit too much on the way that things have always been. But I think certainly there's nothing wrong with having an article which points out in relative, clarity what you are giving up when you upload video onto Spotify, given that, in many parts of the world, it's 50, 60, 70% of all podcast consumption. You just need to be aware, if you are going to upload a video, of the things that it will actually break for you, even if your audience is just listening to the audio, I think.
I was reading the business journal from you, and, you have a chart in there. And you were highlighting the fact that Acast, Adobe, Amazon, Audio Boom, everyone's shares were dropping like a rock. But the one company that stood out at the bottom was Spotify. And that, even then, when everyone else in the market was dropping, saw a 6.2% increase in their share price. And it says something that the market thinks their strategy, maybe for video, maybe for audiobooks, which we'll talk about shortly, but the overall profitability of Spotify and their strategy seems the market likes them.
It does. It seems the market's in love with what Spotify is doing right now. I mean, a sea of red, as you say. If you get the Podcast Business Journal email every single week, it shows you the 30-day changes in the stock market. Right now, it's a sea of red for everyone. Audio Boom down 34%, Acast down 16%, Spotify up 6%, the only company which isn't down in the last 30 days. And I think that says quite a lot in terms of how the company has done. I suppose what will be helpful for us now is to learn a little bit more about how Spotify video works, and probably the right person to talk to is at Spotify, the head of podcast product. I spoke with Maya Prohovnik, tomorrow. As we record this, I've got no idea what she's going to say, but I thought I would get in touch. And firstly, I asked her how she thought Spotify video was going.
It's going great. And I'm so happy you were able to be at that event. We were happy to have you there. As you know, I mean, we're seeing a lot of excitement from Spotify users about video. So I'll give you a couple stats that we're very excited about. One is that since last year, we're seeing users have increased by 44% how much they're looking at Spotify, which I think is really interesting. Like, they're actually using it in the foreground. We've also seen that if you look at the top 20 video podcasts, for example, who have signed up for the Spotify Partner Program, they're seeing an average of 24% growth on Spotify in terms of their audience. So we're really happy both in terms of the offering we've been able to bring to users, but also in the outcome that we're seeing for creators. It just feels very positive, and we're still super early.
In the podcast that this is going into, Sam, I know, because I recorded it last night, is very excited about the new video view that you get when you're scrolling through your shows.
Yes.
And that's a brand new thing, isn't it?
It is. And I was actually going to ask you why this podcast isn't video, James. At least this episode.
I know. Well, at least this episode, frankly, should have been, shouldn't it?
I know. I'll try to convince you by the end of this episode. We'll see if you're excited about video.
That would have been a clever plan.
You called out some of the new experiences we have in Spotify. And this is one of the things we're really excited about, and I think really contributing to that audience growth for video shows. There are all these new ways to get in front of audiences on Spotify. And while we're not limiting those experiences to video shows, you can clearly see that you get a lot more evaluation information when there are visuals. And so I think that is really helping kind of get users closer to what the content is of an episode. We're always trying to think of new ways to make podcast discovery better. And so this feels really like a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it certainly in terms of getting new people to consume your podcasts, it certainly seems as if it's one in terms of that. I've been carrying some stories about companies that have moved from audio to video, and they've made a bit of a thing that they weren't earning as much. How is it working in terms of the revenue that creators are getting?
Yeah, well, maybe, if it's okay with you, maybe we can step back first and just talk about our video strategy, how SPP works, because I think there is I want to make sure that the foundation is clear. Okay, great. So let's do that, and then I'm happy to get into the revenue piece. So I'll just start with video is not new on Spotify. This is not something we suddenly added. We've had video catalog on Spotify for 5 or 6 years, I think since 2019. But there's a couple things that have shifted that I know you're very intimately aware of. One is that the demand from podcast audiences for video is, I would say, undeniable at this point. We've all seen that the definition of podcast has expanded. We see that now the vast majority of users expect and prefer podcasts to have a video option, and more of them are actually consuming that content in the foreground. So I think it is happening to the podcast industry. It maybe has already happened. So I think that is one of the things that's new in the past few years. The other thing that's new is this Spotify partner program. So we've had video on the platform for a long time. We haven't had a great way to sort of to monetize video and to optimize for video. And so this is the piece that we're really excited about and that I want to make sure people understand. The reason that we did this is because, Spotify is primarily a premium subscription business. And we saw this opportunity to both improve the experience for our subscribers, right? Like now when you watch a video podcast as a Spotify subscriber, you don't have to be interrupted by ads, which is really nice. But the other exciting piece of this is that we're able to give creators a direct cut of that premium engagement, that revenue. And spoiler, I'll go through the details, but what we're actually seeing is that for almost all shows who have switched from audio to video, they're making more total revenue. So I'll pause there, but that's at a high level, that's why we're doing video. That's how the Spotify partner program works. Any questions there before I go into the revenue piece?
Yeah, I'm curious as to how payments work, and is there a qualifying amount of a video to watch? I do a 5-minute long show every day. Should that be 50 minutes long? Will I earn more money that way? How does it work from that point of view?
Yeah, I think what's cool is because you're being paid directly for engagement, that works whether your show is 5 minutes long or 5 hours long. You're paid for the total engagement that you're getting on Spotify. So it's a very clear kind of transparent model. Cool.
Is there any sort of detail in terms of how much money goes into that? So if you're a Spotify premium subscriber, there's some money that goes into a pot that then gets shared out. Is that basically how it works?
I would think of it more as it's direct engagement, it's direct revenue based on the amount of engagement you get. And so this is actually not a secret. We surface this for creators in Spotify for Creators after they sign up for this. So if and when you do try the Spotify partner program, you can just log in and see exactly what's happening with your show. But I think, again, I would love to zoom out and go back to talk about total revenue, because this is the question we keep getting from people is how much money will I make from premium? What is the exact RPM in premium? And I think that really misses the bigger picture, because the landscape for podcast monetization, as you know, is very complicated. And the reality is that you have to look at how all of this stuff works together. And that is really the thing that I'm most excited to talk to you about today and try to dispel some of these misunderstandings or pieces of concern that people have about the program.
Okay, because we've talked a lot about video, but obviously this has an impact on audio as well, I guess. Spotify Partner Program, does that do both video monetization and audio monetization?
Yeah. So basically, if you opt into Spotify Partner Program, you are able to monetize both your video and your audio content. We only pay out premium revenue for video content, though.
And that has recently expanded to 9 new countries, including Ireland and New Zealand. Now, I thought that was just good for creators in those countries because they can now sign up if they're eligible. But it does sound as if it means more money for creators in places like the US and the UK as well. So if I've understood this right, whenever the Spotify Partner Program is expanded to more countries, every eligible creator is earning more from the audience in those countries as well. Is that how that works?
Exactly. And it obviously depends how much of your audience is in each of those markets. But there are a number of shows that have large audiences outside of the US or outside of these initial SPP markets. So you are correct. That is a big part of why we're so excited about the expansion.
Yeah. And so expanding both to additional English-speaking countries, if you can claim that people in New Zealand speak English, but also I'm Australian, I can say that. But also in terms of expanding to other countries as well. And my guess is that that's going to expand a little bit further. I suppose one of the questions that I do have, and it's a possibly a rude question, but if you've got Spotify Premium, you get videos that are uninterrupted by ads. Why would advertisers only want to reach people who can't afford to pay for Spotify Premium?
Oh, I think that's a really interesting way to frame the question. So I think what advertisers care about at the end of the day is reaching as many audiences, as many people as possible. And maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of like step back and talk about the whole revenue picture here. Because the way that SPP works, so just to kind of go through how it works on every platform where your podcast is available. I'll start with off-platform, like how this works on your RSS feed. So the short answer there is it works just like it does today, right? We still are distributing that content over RSS. It is monetized with DAI, dynamic ad insertion, as it is today. Nothing changes. In Spotify Free, you're still able to run dynamic ads, but they're delivered through SAI, streaming ad insertion, which is our on-platform equivalent of DAI. But so you're still able to reach Spotify Free audiences and use dynamic ads there. With Spotify Premium, what you can do, even if you have video content, is you can bake in sponsorships. And so what's really cool there is that if you have an advertising campaign that spans dynamic ads and baked in sponsorships, you are still reaching the same audiences on Spotify. And because we have the ability, there's some improvements that we're working on now, but we have the ability to actually measure audiences who are experiencing those baked in sponsorships. You can imagine a situation where advertisers actually are able to reach those premium audiences. Publishers are able to sell those sponsorships at a premium price. And so the benefit is there for the creator and for the advertisers. So I think we often get this question of people are so nervous about, quote, we're not on video, but I'm putting quotes up, losing access to Spotify Premium users. That's really not the case. And this is part of why we're so excited about baked in sponsorships. And we've seen that this is a really exciting piece of the puzzle for publishers who are open to experimenting with that. It can actually be a way for for this revenue to be additive for you, as opposed to just thinking about what you're, quote, losing when you switch to video.
So baked in, is clearly one thing, but you do lose dynamic ad insertion. You lose vast ads, if I've understood it. You can't use third-party analytics with prefix URLs either, so far as I understand it from one of the articles that I've read recently.
Well, so I think let's break that down because I think I want to start with we certainly do understand and agree with the importance of ad measurement, third-party attribution, and being able to give a consistent and a full picture to advertisers. So that's really important to us. And we are, as I said, we're working on ways to fill some of the gaps that you mentioned. I'm excited to share more information when we can, but just want to start with we acknowledge that that gap, we see it, we agree with the problem, and so we're working on that. I do want to talk about the whole picture here. So when we talk about losing something, I really think we can change this conversation to talk about how video is an optional and additive layer to your existing audio podcast strategy. So if you think about what happens when you turn video on Spotify, which you should not do if you are not making video content, I would not recommend that. But if you are already making video content and you want to experiment with monetizing it on Spotify, first think about most shows, the vast majority, do not have 100% sell-through rates. Maybe a couple do, but the vast majority of them are not selling through 100% of their inventory. So one thing that immediately happens when you do this and you stop trying to fill premium inventory is you're able to more effectively fill the inventory that you have available on Spotify free and across your RSS feed. So that's one calculation that I think sometimes people miss the reality of. And then, as I said before, what actually happens in total is that for almost every show, premium video revenue matches or exceeds the payouts from the dynamic ads that you were running previously in Spotify Premium. So the picture that I want to paint for you is let's imagine a world where nothing else changes except that you are now delivering video instead of audio to Spotify. We are confident saying that the vast majority of shows, almost all of them that we've seen, make roughly the same amount of money from that transition. So premium video revenue pays out as effectively as your dynamic ads do. There's a lot of variables and factors here depending on the show. So there's a little over under, but think of that as roughly equivalent to what you're making today. But what actually happens is that two additional things happen as a result of switching to video. And one, as I mentioned, is you can start selling those baked in premium sponsorships for Spotify Premium. And a lot of publishers are already starting to do this today with video that they have on other platforms or with Spotify. These can be sold at higher premium rates. And as I said, they still enable you to reach that same audience on Spotify Premium. So overall, and again, I think we have some work to do on measurement and attribution, but overall, you're still reaching the same audiences. You have these sponsorships at higher premium. So you're actually getting some additive revenue there. And then the other thing that happens as a result is that audiences grow directly and meaningfully as a result of switching from audio to video. So you and I talked about some of these new features on Spotify that make video perform better. So we're seeing that video episodes, all else being equal, convert and retain users better than audio only. But it's also because we have these new surfaces where Spotify is able to really let that shine and get you right in front of those users. And so I mentioned this at the top, but we have all of these great success stories now. And I'll just point again to of the top 20 video podcasts on Spotify, they've seen an average across all of them of 24% audience growth as a direct result of switching to video. So this is why it's so hard for me to sort of have this debate of what do I lose when I switch to video? I really think that's the wrong way to look at the big picture. And I also just want to reiterate, we are not forcing anyone into this. This is an optional thing that I would recommend if you are already making video content or if you're thinking about expanding to video. If you are in that bucket, I think you're going to be thrilled by the outcome of SPP. If you're an audio only show, I think there are all kinds of or a primarily audio show. There are operational challenges. There are some gaps with reporting back to advertisers that we need to fill. So I think the reality is this is a new program for us. We're really thrilled with how it's going. We think there's a ton of room for improvement in the future, but the true answer is that almost everyone who is using this program today are really happy with what it means for their revenue. So I think we just have to, as an industry, I think we have to get comfortable with talking about this in less black and white terms, because, I'm happy to talk to you about why video doesn't make sense over RSS. I've been down that road many times, but it just doesn't. It's not the right solution for video. And I want all of us as an industry to focus less on how we can squeeze video into the standards that we're currently used to, and more how we can lean into video and make sure that people who are making video can reach as many audiences as possible and can make as much money as possible. And that's really what we're focused on.
Now, there's a company called Flightcast, which is owned by Stephen Bartlett. That calls itself the first video podcast host, which is very exciting. And interestingly, they have an API which allows them to upload video directly into Spotify. So there's no logging into Spotify for creators and uploading video themselves. Is video upload going to be available to other podcast hosting companies soon, or is this a special because it's Stephen Bartlett?
Well, we do love Stephen Bartlett, but we fundamentally, we do believe that creators should be able to distribute and monetize their content on Spotify, regardless of where they're hosted. This works today for audio. We would love for it to work with video. The reality is there's just a lot of technical work that we have to do to make this possible. So we have to make sure that the right infrastructure is in place, and it's not done yet. And we also have to make sure that incentives are aligned with hosting providers. So we're really excited about it. We do believe in that as a goal. And we're talking to a number of partners and publishers about how we can work together with them on this. So again, we're excited to share more when the time is right. But as you've noted, yes, that is already in the works with Flightcast.
Yeah, and I think certainly you can argue very strongly that sticking video into RSS feeds, I mean, it's technically possible, but it's not a great user experience.
Exactly.
So yeah, definitely go with that. You've said that video isn't for everyone. Who is really succeeding in video? Do you have any sort of demos of who is consuming video? Are there particular shows which are working better than others?
I mean, it's hard to say because I think that, again, like everyone who has started using video is pretty happy with how it's going. I guess I don't want to call it anyone in particular because I don't think we're seeing that there's a specific category or a specific show that's working better. But I would just say generally we're seeing a lot of excitement from users about consuming video. And I think what's really interesting is like, obviously we're looking at video podcasts, but the reality is that Spotify users are starting to look for more and more video on Spotify. And so what I get really excited about is just seeing what else is going to make sense on our platform. I don't really know where that line is going to be, but users are telling us increasingly that they are expecting more types of video on Spotify.
Finally, you've got a bigger family, so congratulations for that. Does being a new mum give you any time to find new podcasts to have a listen to?
Oh my God, what a hard pivot to motherhood. This is also why my brain only works at 50% because I just had a baby 5 months ago. So hopefully the things I'm saying are making sense. But I have a small amount of free time. I listen to podcasts when I'm in the car, and I certainly am always getting solicited and unsolicited podcast recommendations from people.
I'm sure you are. But you haven't necessarily found any new ones. You see, that was a really easy one to say, oh, there's this show from The Ringer.
I will actually. Let me plug my current favorite show. I'm actually really into the new Amy Poehler show. Have you seen it?
I haven't.
Oh, it's so good. It's called Good Hang.
Yeah.
And it's extremely wholesome and very funny, as you would expect from Amy Poehler. But I really love her whole pitch for the show is just to give people an opportunity to like forget about everything that's going on in the world and just have fun. And so as a new mom, as someone who is sort of in a constant state of busyness and stress, it is really nice to just watch her and her comedian friends get goofy. And I say watch because I'm actually watching it as a video podcast, but you can, of course, also listen to it in the background.
Hooray. And that's a Ringer show, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. A fine Spotify company. And are you still doing your shows as well?
I am. I have, I think, I have a few shows in varying states of activeness. The one that I'm still doing very actively, my husband and I do it together. It is about being new parents. So we started it 4-ish years ago when we had our son, and we have continued using it to complain about how hard it is to be a parent of small children. If people are interested, it's called The End of the World as We Know It. And it is sometimes depressing, but we try to keep it mostly, high energy, and we try to bring it back to everything's going to be okay. But 2 small children is, it's a thing.
Just one final question to you. We've clearly spoken a lot about video, a lot about how video works on Spotify, but also how it all fits into everything else. If people do have questions, what's the best way of getting those answered?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of people do have questions. And I just want to say, as I mentioned, we're working with a ton of people throughout the industry, our partners, many publishers, many hosting platforms. We are interested in talking to everyone about how we can make this work with the industry and what gaps people are seeing that they'd like us to address. So I would love for people to reach out if they want to have that discussion. I would say, so if you're a show on Spotify and you have a partner manager, obviously reach out to them. They are ready. They have all the same information I have. They're really eager to talk to people about this. If you don't have a partner manager, you can reach out to us through support channels on either Spotify for Creators or Megaphone. And I think this is clear, but just to clarify, you can use Spotify for Creators even if you are hosted somewhere else. So it's still a great portal for you into many of the features that Spotify has to offer. And then, as always, people are also welcome to reach out to me. I'm Maya Fish on most social media platforms, and I love talking about this stuff. So always happy to have those conversations.
Very cool. Thank you so much for talking about it with us.
Yeah. And thank you so much just for the opportunity. I think, it's always so great to get to talk to other people in the industry who are thinking about these challenges. And so we welcome the questions, we welcome the discussion, and we really appreciate your kind of attention to detail on this and thinking about what this can look like for the future of the industry.
The Pod News Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Start podcasting, keep podcasting.
Now, one thing I would say, Brian might be worried about advertising and the lack of programmatic ads in Spotify. But we hear also all the time from hosts who say, oh, yeah, and this is not good. We don't like Spotify. We don't like YouTube. They're taking our content, but, and we're not getting any data back. We're not having any information. There's no pass through. And yet I don't believe one host is brave enough to stop distributing to Spotify or YouTube their RSS feeds. Are they?
There is one host which has been brave enough to not put their podcast onto Spotify, their official podcast. And of course, that one host is Buzzsprout, our sponsor. You can't listen to the Buzzcast podcast on Spotify.
I think we were in Spotify for a little while. And I think there was a point at which we agreed that this is just feeling too hostile to open podcasting and we don't want to be there anymore. And I think we took ourselves out. That's how I remember it. So maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm not.
This is our thing. We are podcasters. We work for a podcasting company. We are trying to influence the podcasting ecosystem. This is our home, and it's now being changed to be more like the rest of the web. And so, yes, there's plenty of problems around the web and some of the exact same type of problem, even worse. And yet it's not all here yet. And so we're not going to be the ones to change it. Like, no, Daniel Ek is not going to call us and actually try to get Buzzcast into Spotify, but it's still principled. It's not moral, but it is principled to say, look, we don't like this. And so we're not going to participate in it. It probably won't matter except for like 300 people who would like to use Spotify as their main app, and they don't really want to listen. And now they don't want to listen to Buzzcast. That's okay.
But they don't feel that it is right for Buzzsprout users as a whole for them to cut off Spotify, but certainly their own content isn't there, which I think says quite a lot. But yes, I totally agree. That's basically it. That's as far as you get. Yep. No other podcast host has turned around and said, you know what, we're not going to play. And actually, when you have a look at the numbers, numbers that I shared on the Evolutions stage in the Pod News newsletter a couple of weeks ago, showing how big Spotify is in some of these countries, particularly South America. No one in their right minds would pull off Spotify. So I don't think that's necessarily the issue. I think the issue is more an issue around concern about what video does to the audio experience.
William Shakespeare had something to say on this, James. He said, the host doth protest too much. So, yes.
Well, there you go.
Moving on, James, then let's have a look. Spotify still. Ashley Carman, friend of the show, has a report covering Spotify music takedowns. What she had to say, James?
Yeah, so this is nothing particularly new. Spotify has always removed the use of commercial music in podcasts. And it used to be the case that regardless of what license you had, they would just remove it because it was easier for them just to remove the whole thing. And Ashley has covered the fact that Spotify is doing a lot of music takedowns right now. And I think that that's probably the right thing for Spotify to end up doing. Having said that, there was one thing that I was able to get a little bit more information on from our friends at Spotify. as clearly we've got the friends at Spotify these days. If you have commercial music in your show now, then you get 8 days to prove the fact that you have correctly licensed that music, and or to argue the case that it's fair use or whatever it might be. There is also an appeals process in there as well. So that's super helpful. And I've heard Todd Cochran and other people in the past saying that they get tons of relatively automated takedowns every single week from podcasters using copyrighted music from Spotify. So
Spotify still, sorry everybody. We should have played that jingle. The audio book market is a significant market. It's an $8.7 billion market, and Spotify are leaning heavily into it. They've just invested another €1 million or $1.1 million to increase production of audiobooks in non-English languages. What are they up to?
I think they are. I think they've realised that actually it's quite difficult and quite expensive to make audiobooks, and certainly in non-English language, there frankly isn't the catalogue out there, and they want more books to be available in their app, because they can see that being a way of retaining paid subscribers. So I think what they're basically going is, we don't have enough books in France. We don't have enough books in Holland. I mean, in the Netherlands, how many audiobooks are there really going to be made in Dutch? So actually sticking some money behind that. Some of it is going to be AI. Some of it is not. Some of it's going to be real human beings. But, according to Spotify, less than 3% of French language books are currently available in audio format. 20,000 books available in France, for example, 20,000 audio books. So not very many. And similarly, Dutch audio books, I mean, it's tiny, 15,000 audio books in that country. So so they can certainly, if they pile a little bit of money in there, then who knows, that might help that.
Daniel X said, one of my favorite things about working at Spotify is to see and learn from users' behavior to see what we can develop better. Just a few years ago, we noticed that publishers and fans in Germany were uploading podcasts and audiobooks to Spotify, which really got us thinking about innovation in this space. So they've now rolled it out not only into France and Germany, but they've also gone into Austria, Switzerland, and little old Liechtenstein. Yes, Americans, please look it up on a map. It does exist. But he's very excited about one feature, which I thought was very funny. Check out our resume points so you can pick up right where you left off. That's the killer feature.
Yes, I'm sure that the PR person that crafted that quote for Daniel is very excited about that particular thing. But yes, audiobooks are really interesting. I have to say, though, we did cover a story this week around one of the potential things that Spotify's audiobooks that Spotify diving into audiobooks has changed. And that's that if you have a podcast, which is essentially an audiobook, so you're reading out public domain stories, for example, or you're reading out works for which the podcaster has the rights for, then you will not get into Spotify's SPAN advertising tool at all. They will turn around and they say it's against our monetization policies. You can't earn any money from these audiobook-like podcasts, and perhaps the right way for you to earn money is to actually release it as an audiobook properly, which is interesting. So that's based on a particular podcast publisher who came to us, who actually acquired a big show, but was unable to turn it into money, slightly embarrassingly, because Spotify turned around and said, no, it's not part of our part of the deal. So I thought that was really interesting as well.
I struggle, I'll be honest, to say what's the difference sometimes between an audio book and a podcast. So when we talk to Evo Terra, a friend of the show, about some true crimes, and he will say, well, that's a true crime audio book and that's a true crime podcast. And I'm like, well, they sound the same to me. It's somebody reading a story about a conversation or a thriller. It's not a interview format podcast like this. and I can't see the difference. But is it because they've got a publisher that it makes it an audiobook? Is it because it's, I don't know, what makes the difference?
Well, yeah, exactly. Who knows? But it's a different user experience sometimes in apps and things like that. So perhaps that's part of that.
Duncan Bruce of Spotify, who clearly works within their audiobook department, whatever it's called, he mentioned something which I just picked up the last part of it. We're working on integrating supplementary materials like maps or diagrams. We're also doing pre-order countdown pages, which they've done for music and albums for a while. And we're using our algorithmic recommendation system in order to guide users to audiobooks they love. So they're trying to make it much more like music discovery or podcast discovery, but it's the integrated supplementary materials. And I just wonder how they're doing that. Is it going to be like an ebook? Is it going to be whatever? So quite interesting to see what they'll do with that.
Yeah, indeed. And by the way, he is based in the UK. He's Director of Audiobook Partnerships and Licensing. Used to work for Penguin Random House and before that Pearson. So he's a man who knows a thing or two about books.
And you mentioned that some of those books may be AI narrated using their partner 11 Labs, which you've used in the past, by the way, haven't you? Or at least Wondercraft used them as well. He, again, just a little snippet of what he said. We clearly label AI narrated content. And again, I'm thinking, okay, we've talked about an AI label for Podcasting 2.0 in the past, but we haven't really got a clear idea of what we should do. Maybe we should look here.
Maybe, indeed.
Now, James, there was a report out this week from Sirius XM Media and Edison Research. What was this one about?
Yes, this was good news about women's podcast listenerships. It's tripled in 10 years, according to the results. 45% of all women in the US are monthly listeners. 52% consume podcasts in some form. So good numbers in terms of that. I would sort of also say on that female podcast listenership is less than male. So we still need to bear that in mind. And there are clearly, issues, of course, with some of the content which is available on shows. But yeah, it was a good looking audio report. I'm looking forward to reading the entire thing, which I believe you can get from the Sirius XM Media website. So good news if you're trying to attract women.
I think it is great news, and I'm curious as to what content men are listening to and women. Are we following stereotypical lines? Men, it's technology, it's cars, it's whatever. And is it women talking about motherhood and maternity and those? And I hope it's not, but I suspect that will be the delineation between the type of content that men are listening to and women are listening to.
Yeah, it is. From all of the research that I have seen on that, it does follow what you would kind of expect. True crime, of course, doing very well for women as well. But I think it's interesting seeing some of the data here and seeing where the opportunities are. Female podcast consumers, the data says, skew younger. They have higher incomes and higher education levels. So again, just worthwhile bearing in mind that there's real opportunity there. 52% of women aged 18 plus consuming podcasts monthly, whether it's audio or video. So there's some good numbers coming out of that.
I'd like to say one of our goals, James, for this podcast has been to get more female voices. And I think we're doing pretty well so far for 2025. In the first few months that we've been broadcasting, we've had Annalisa Nielsen, we've had Chloe Straw, Megan Lazarevich, Rocky Thomas, and Emma Turner. So I think, and of course, Maya Prohovnik from today. So I think we are actually trending more towards women guests right now than we are men.
Maybe two old men talking about, not that I'm calling you old, Sam, but two old men talking about talking about this is not the right thing.
I just like to say, James, black don't crack. We're good. Moving on.
As I'm saying in a conference in Canada in a couple of weeks' time, I'm supposed to be there talking about the future of radio. And I am appearing alongside another white man who is even older and has even more white hair than I do. And it's just like, why are we talking to 55-year-old men about what the future is going to be? Surely talking to some younger people might be helpful. But anyway, talking about women in podcasts, interesting to see that Goalhanger, which is the largest independent podcast company in the UK and possibly even the world, they are to release a brand new show, or have released a brand new show. It's called The Rest is Football, Daily Brightness. It's being hosted by England women footballers Millie Bright and Rachel Daly. I thought this was interesting for two reasons. Firstly, obviously, it's a show elevating England women footballers to the same heights as male footballers, which is a good thing. But also, secondly, this is a brand extension. Now, brand extensions are a big deal in terms of the radio industry in the UK. If you have a look at Heart, which is a radio station aimed at 30-something women, there is also Heart 80s and Heart Christmas and Heart 70s and lots of additional Heart brand extensions, which they sell as one whole. And similarly, we're seeing brand extensions beginning to happen now in terms of podcasts. So The Rest is Politics had The Rest is Politics US, which is a US version. And now we're seeing The Rest is Football having a female version, The Rest is Football Daily Brightness. I think it's a really interesting trend in podcasting. And I'm curious to see whether or not we will see more brand extensions in that way in the future from other large shows. I mean, Joe Rogan, he could very easily do a brand extension doing something a little bit different, the Joe Rogan diet or...
No, I want to hear the female Joanna Rogan.
Joanna Rogan. Oh dear. Moving on. Acast.
Acast has partnered with a Supercast to offer paid subscription tools. What's this about?
This is basically... Now, this is interesting. I thought that Acast already did this with a product that they had called Acast Plus. It seems to have quietly gone away.
Yes.
And instead, Acast has partnered with Supercast so that you can sell... your listeners access to exclusive audio and video content, ad-free feeds, the ability to engage with other fans, all of that kind of stuff. And they're using Supercast to do that, which means that they will get into Spotify and get into other platforms as well. So an interesting move from Acast in terms of that. But certainly Supercast and Supporting Cast appear to be doing really well at the moment in terms of signing up clients and everything else.
I think Patreon can be added to that list. I think they're another company that has extended that. We've talked about Spotify's SOA, Spotify Open Access, the closed access model. And by the way, you mentioned Patreon. Patreon only yesterday announced live video, which is to roll out in the next few months. So creators can go live through the web or via the Patreon mobile app. That I'm sure will be a tremendous boon to the porn industry. But I think also... I hope Patreon doesn't become only Patreon.
I have a feeling that it already is in some way.
Is it?
In some places, yes.
Clearly haven't got a membership then. Right.
But yeah, so there's a bunch of that kind of stuff going on. Supercast is interesting, by the way, and if you look at Supercast's payment charges, then they charge essentially 60 cents, so $0.6 for each subscriber. They don't charge any Apple fee, obviously, and all of that. So all of that is quite nice.
I think this is the get round the Apple, isn't it? Do the payment off platform and then tokenize it on platform into an iOS app. So again, that's the only way around Apple.
I think you could well be right. And I think it's interesting seeing this week Pocket Casts beginning to support the podcast funding tag, because that is great. So if you're listening to this show in Pocket Casts, because our sponsor Buzzsprout supports the podcast funding tag, you will see it's a little picture of a dollar coin, which you can click on, and you can become a weekly supporter through there. So that's a pretty cool thing. And I would imagine, given that Pocket Cast has got that through Apple's app checks, I would imagine that opens that up for other podcast companies to also do that. And
don't mention it.
They do that.
Apple haven't noticed. Shh.
Well, I don't know, because I think if you were to follow, for example, that same link from the Pod News Daily podcast, then it would take you to Patreon. But of course, it would open the Patreon mobile app, and Apple will get 30% of any money that people pledge the Pod News Daily podcast through Patreon. So I think actually that Apple does pretty well out of it. If Patreon has an app, if other people have apps, then Apple still gets their 30%. So I think it's a good thing for Apple, actually. I think Apple could earn quite substantially out of that.
Yeah. The other thing I've noticed is a trend with Substack, Patreon, Memberful, Supercast and others, that they are becoming, I think, really interesting creator platforms. Because if you look at Substack, they do blogging, they do live video podcasting. You look at Patreon, same thing now. I actually think these are the platforms that I'm really keen to look at in 2025, because I think, as I said last week, there's a move away from free to quality paid content. And I think the quality paid content to get around the Apple is going to be these super apps, whatever they want to call themselves.
Yeah.
And I think these are the ones that I think we should be watching closely to see how they're creating content, commerce, and community together in one place.
Indeed. Completely agree. Let's go around the world very quickly. Podcast One in the US has seen video views surge 218% year over year. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, wow, Spotify and YouTube are going well. Well, actually, no, because they're posting on more places, aren't they, Sam?
Yeah, look, we just said it. Look, they're posting on Rumble, which I don't really take any notice of, Substack and Patreon. And so I think we are affixed to YouTube and Spotify. But actually, as I just said, we need to look broader. And I think that's video is going to be much more common across other platforms as well.
Now, in terms of awards and events, many congratulations to Twit, who we would give an award to for celebrating 20 years of podcasting. Leo Laporte posting only the other day about that. So many congratulations for that. But Crossed Wires, which is a podcast festival, has named a brand new person, Greg James, who is a podcaster, but also presents the BBC Radio 1 breakfast show. You caught up with Dino Sophos from Crossed Wires, and the first thing you asked him is, what is the Crossed Wires Podcast Festival?
Alongside a couple of my friends, Alice Levine, the host of My Dad Wrote a Porno, British Scandal, and another friend of mine, James O'Hara, who founded various events such as Tramlines Festival, also up here in Sheffield, and runs a daytime club night called Day Fever. We all went for a long walk and a pint, and as you know, Sam, the best ideas are formed over pints. And we were talking about this growth of live podcasts, and just if you think over the past year or two, the shows we've seen, Parenting Hell selling out 2 nights at the O2, Rest is Politics selling out the O2, shows going on UK tours. Alice Levine herself has done like a world tour with My Dad Wrote a Porno, Sydney Opera House, New York, did a whole US tour on that. And we were saying that there's lots of events, the sort of events that you and I go to, Sam, where we sit in windowless rooms talking about CPM rates. That is a kind of like business is booming there. You know, there are lots of those events all around the world where we have a whale of a time. and, everyone's wearing lanyards and it's great. But there isn't something really big and ambitious for fans of podcasts, for listeners. And we just thought there's a huge gap in the market there. So let's create something. What is the Edinburgh Festival for podcasts? What is the kind of the Glastonbury for podcasts? And we started talking to different podcasters around it going, would you be up for, hypothetically speaking, would you be up for doing something? And the resounding answer was yes. There's a huge gap in the market for this. Because we all know that listening to podcasts is a very solitary experience. You listen on your headphones at home on the dog walk. But actually what we're seeing with podcasts, and you know this better than anyone, is the communities around shows. Mm-hmm. And people subscribing and wanting to get closer to the hosts, but then also wanting to share the kind of in-jokes with other podcast listeners. And that's what we see at live shows. So, for example, recently we did a couple of live shows with Miss Me, with Lily Allen, Makita Oliver at Hackney Empire, sold out in minutes. And people wanted to come and have a party. They weren't there to listen to a kind of like boring Q&A. They were getting out of their seats when we were playing music. They were dressed up for the night. It was an event and they wanted to be with other podcast listeners. So we wanted to tap into that basically. So the first festival was last year and we sort of didn't really know what to expect, but we had some huge names sign up. We had Catherine Ryan, we had Ramesh Ranganathan, we had Danny Robbins and Uncanny, we had Adam Buxton, the king of podcasts. And what was great is it wasn't just go and see a show, go home. There were after parties. We even had our own beer brewed for the podcast. Wow. Do you know what it was called?
No.
Podcask.
Oh.
Podcask.
Okay. Less of the alcohol and walks on that one, please.
But it was, so we'll come on to talk about Greg James, but Greg James was one of the podcasters who came up and he really got in amongst it. He was there kind of like, meeting the fans, chatting to them in the bar afterwards. We had a couple of really great late night parties where you looked around and there was like 5 different podcast hosts and then just loads of listeners and everybody connecting. And it was just such a special, when you're at the start of something new and you feel like this is really, really special. And there were some industry people there who just come to watch, and be part of it. And so Wondery and Amazon Music sponsored our first year. So we had a lot of the guys from the BBC there and everybody was just like, wow, this is special. Nothing else like this exists. And we really want to come again next year. So, when you launch something and everybody starts talking about the next one, you're like, oh, right, I'm glad you've assumed there's a next one. So Greg came on, so he came last year. He really, really enjoyed it. And he said, I want to come again. And Alice, James and I just started talking to each other and going, well, should we see if Greg wants to come on board in a more official capacity? So we approached him, sat down with him, and he said, 100% yes. I'm all over it. This is really exciting. I want to help grow it over the next few years and see what this thing can become. So he's now joined. He's a co-owner of the company. He is creative director and he's already getting to work on booking some of the amazing lineup that we have this year. So the dates are 4th to the 6th of July. In Sheffield, and we'll come on to why Sheffield in a bit. And we've got, Help I Sexted My Boss. We've got Dish with Nick Grimshaw and Angela Hartnett. We've got No Such Thing as a Fish, Richard Herring, Paul C. Brunson. So the Flight Studio guys have come on board. Loads of BBC shows, and we'll come on to talk about that.
Any international shows in there, do you know?
Yes. So, I'd say Paul C. Brunson, We Need to Talk is an international show. No Such Thing as a Fish, massive international audience there. So, look, it's a UK festival, right?
No, that's fine. I just wondered whether the internationals had rung you up and said, hey, Dino, I heard about your festival. Can we come and rock up to it?
It's really interesting. And there is a future in which Who Says That Crosswires has to be a UK event forever. And, I think what's amazing about podcasting is if you look at podcast charts in different countries, they are completely different. If you go to the Australian chart or the Irish chart or the US chart, there are a few like similar shows like Joe Rogan or whatever. But if we were to do an event in a different country, it would be the same ethos and the same spirit, but it would be a completely different lineup, which I think is really exciting. That's why music festivals actually differ, because actually pretty much you look at Coachella, that could be the same lineup for Glastonbury, right? So back bigger and better this year. some amazing sponsors. So Audible have come on board. They're going to be sponsoring our main venue, actually. Wondery are back on board. And there's some more sponsors, which I can't announce just yet, but they're really, really big ones. And then the why Sheffield question, which a lot of people ask. Look, it's an incredible city, fourth largest city in the UK, and it's got some amazing venues. And I think the thing about the venues and what we really like about it, it's an incredibly small footprint. So we've got the Crucible, the World Snooker Championships are happening in the Crucible over the next couple of weeks. It's an incredibly intimate venue, 1,000 cap. We've also got Sheffield City Hall, which is an amazing Art Deco big venue, which is over 2,000. So we've got some really perfect size venues for podcasts, which aren't too big, allow us to put big acts on, but I still feel intimate. And they're all within a stone's throw of each other. So you really create that kind of, it's a city festival, but you're not having to get in taxis. So it's that model, which is great. And it's also great to be in the middle of the country. So Sheffield's about as far south in Yorkshire as you can get. So people from Scotland can come to us. People from Manchester can come across the Pennines. 40%, this is a really great stat, which I hadn't really appreciated until I started talking to people who run festivals, how unusual it is, but over 40% of people came from outside South Yorkshire for the festival, and that's very high. So we had a lot of people travelling from London, making a weekend of it, again, just to take part in that community of podcasts. We're really pleased with it, and we're in the growth phase, definitely. It's only year 2, but we're really excited about what this could become.
I think, as you said, you've identified a market opportunity. I think people after COVID are desperate for connection in real world. I think people want something different. We've all done the gigs. We've all done the comedy scene. Podcasting is growing. It is content, commerce and community. And that community element. It's funny, as you said, people listen solitary to a podcast without realizing that thousands of other people are listening to the same podcast. And then when they get together, it's that parasocial moment of, oh, I remember when Lily said that. I remember when they said that on that show and that show, right? And it's that fan-to-fan connection. So, as you said, let's focus on this Sheffield thing. If I wanted to get tickets, where would I go?
So, through our website, crossedwires.live. So, it's crossed, CROSSED wires, as you normally spell it, .live. So that's our website. You can also find us on social channels. And we've kept it really simple. We basically let people buy a ticket for an individual show. So you can come and see one show if you like, you can come and see 10 shows if you like. So there isn't a festival ticket. And then also alongside the ticketed shows, there is an amazing free fringe. And we are, I can't say too much yet, but we're going to be taking over an iconic building in Sheffield. One of our partners, who we are yet to announce, is coming on board in a very big way and is helping us program an amazing weekend of free stuff. So you can buy tickets to one show or 2 shows and then fill your weekend with after parties, meet and greets, and free fringe events as well. And in the fringe, there will be a mixture of, I guess, panels where podcasters talk about, how they made their show, and Q&As and things like that. But the big events like Help I Sexted My Boss at Sheffield City Hall or No Such Thing as a Fish, those are ticketed shows that you can buy a ticket for on our website now. In fact, Help I Sexted My Boss is already sold out.
Oh, right.
And that's what's fascinating.
Nice.
Demand for stuff is huge. That's sold out within a couple of days. And as festival programmers, because I'm not an events person, I'm new to this, and I really underestimated when we sort of came up with this idea, and we were like, yeah, we'll do it. It's going to be great. I had underestimated the stress, the amount of work involved in putting on events. Oh my God. It is, you think launching a podcast is stressful.
No, not comparatively. No,
it's crazy. It's just that thing of getting people to part with hard-earned money and turn up somewhere is just such a different level of ask to click on my feed and listen to my podcast, right? So you have to really offer something great and unique, and as you say, kind of something different. And I think that's what we really try to do with Crosswires. It's not just come and see a show, get the train home, bye-bye. It's how can we make a real weekend of it so people want to spend the whole time here and be part of something amazing. And also the shows that we put on. So last year, Alice and Greg did a show we sort of made up on the hoof called Now That's What I Call Podcasting, which was their journeys in podcasting. Now, that's not a show that they'll probably ever do again, but it was great. And everybody who was in the room really loved it. It was off the cuff. It was, funny, unprepared, It was a bit of jeopardy in it.
Oh, I just had an idea based on that.
Go on.
So I think you could take really famous hosts from different shows and mix them up and put them into a one-off show.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's what we're doing. So one of our taglines for the festival in our posters, and shout out, by the way, if people haven't seen our branding, we're really proud of it. One of our friends called Nick Deacon has done the branding, and the posters are just so striking. The imagery and the graphics is really amazing. He's done such a great job with it. And one of our strap lines was Tangle Chats, and that idea of like people from different podcasts coming together. And that's something we really want to do, because again, it's something you had to be there for, that had to be their moment, not just something that we can repeat. And actually, I think that's the great thing about live podcasts as well, is people aren't necessarily putting them on their RSS feeds, which I think is great. Because actually, sometimes listening to a live podcast, I don't know if you find it, when you listen to it in a feed, I'm not really that into it, to be honest, because I feel like it's a bit of like you had to be there.
Yeah, you've got FOMO as well.
You got FOMO, right? So I really like that idea of the live show. And if you look at something like Help I Sexted My Boss, it's not just two people on stage having a chat. And I think actually we're getting past that now. I think the people expect a lot more, and that's what we're learning. If they're paying, 35 quid a ticket, if you come and see some of those big arena shows, it's way more. People expect a show. They don't want just two people having an unscripted chat. So I think the bar has been raised for what people expect. And that's what they get when they come to Crosswise.
But would you also consider, or are you considering having online tickets? So you've said, Help I Sex My Boss is sold out, and people will go, oh, but I really want to go, Dino. I really want to see that. Would there be a secondary market for people to be able to watch it from home with an online ticket?
Sam, you're such an entrepreneur, and that's a great, great question, and not one that we've addressed yet, purely because we're just focusing on, it's year 2, and we're just focusing on creating something where people want to be together. You talked about it earlier, and we want to create something that is in person. We're in a city that isn't expensive to stay if you want to come. It's not expensive to get a train here. We want to make it as accessible as possible. Last year we had The Guardian did a free show. Tortoise did a free show. The Brown Girls Do It Too from the BBC did a free show. So it's sort of free events that you would pay for, and that's the ethos of our Fringe. So we don't want it to just be like anybody can just pitch up and do a podcast. It's actually really, really great stuff that you would pay for, and I think that's different to a lot of other festivals. So we want to make something that even if you can't afford, even if you're like a student in Barnsley and you can't afford 30 quid for a ticket, but you want to come and be part of it, you absolutely can. And I think one of the great things as well, this is not an industry festival, right? We're really clear about that, but we have a lot of industry here and we have a lot of creators here. And we had a studio as part of our Fringe where Steve Lamack and some of the university students, volunteers, were just kind of recording chats with the podcasters who were there. So Steve Lamack went into the studio, Greg was involved. And we had these 2 young lads who turned up from Barnsley. They were doing a podcast for their college. And it was actually really moving because they came to the festival and all of a sudden they were getting Greg James to record jingles for their show. Now, there's absolutely no chance that those lads would be able to afford to go down to London to an industry event, right? Pay a ticket and get that access. And what Crosswise provided was something on their doorstep. And actually the next day we came back and they were in the podcast studio because they obviously just felt like they could come and use it, which was amazing to see. And Greg's really, really passionate about this, is just inspiring the next generation of podcasters. And we know, don't we, that we've got a huge problem in the media industry as a whole with diversity and accessibility and how people who don't live in London or the Southeast get access and get those opportunities. So that's something we really want to do. We want to show people. And also, it's not just about being a host. And I think that's what's really interesting about this live podcast scene. As kind of the music industry is dying on its arse and music venues are closing, there's people who've got transferable skills, who are sound engineers, who are, roadies, all of those jobs. If you see one of those big podcast shows, it's like a gig, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So there are so many jobs that are opening up in this live podcast space, and it's great to be able to show people like there is a whole industry here that's booming and there are opportunities.
Look, Dino, remind everyone else one last time, date, venue and tickets.
So we are taking over the city of Sheffield from the 4th to the 6th of July. So it's the first weekend in July. We are going to have an amazing lineup. The acts that we've announced so far include Tailenders with Greg James, Dish, Nick Grimshaw and Angela Hartnett, No Such Thing as a Fish, Help I Sexted My Boss, Richard Herring, Secret Mum Club, Not the Top 20 Football Podcast. I could go on, but I won't. Head to our website, crossedwires.live, to see the full lineup. Sign up on our mailing list. You will be the first to hear when tickets drop. And if you're listening to this and you're in the industry and you're just curious, come and book a hotel room, drop me a line. We would love to welcome you. And there'll be lots of industry people here as well. One of the things that was just so memorable from last year was with Chris Bourne from Wondery and some of the BBC guys. And they were going to see their shows, like the shows that they commission. And it was just fascinating. They weren't looking at the stage. They were looking at the crowd going, aha, this is who listens to our show.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Just to see the whites of the eyes of the audience that are actually paying 30 odd quid to come out and see a show. That is your next level dedicated fan. And it was just so interesting. So from an industry point of view, if you fancy it, drop us a line. We'd love to welcome you in Sheffield this summer.
Nice. Dino, look forward to seeing you in London as well at the London Podcast Show. And I'd hope
I'll be there.
Me and my wife will make it up this year to the Crosswires. I'd love to come up. So
Please do, mate. Yeah, we'll have a lovely pint of podcast waiting for you.
See you soon, mate.
Cheers, mate.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where Sam talks technology. What's going on in tech, Sam?
First of all, a big congratulations to Daniel J. Lewis, who we interviewed back in December 2024. If you want to know more about Podgagement, he's spent an age importing 6 years of chart rankings. He's achieved it now. He says it's the most detailed charts and ranking provider for podcasting. It's fully international and nearly 34,000 charts from Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So I haven't seen it. Probably should go and have a little nose around if I'm allowed to. Have you had a look at all, James?
I haven't dived into it, but I know that Daniel has worked very hard on that, and quite a lot of the other services that say that they will give you chart data actually don't know that there's really any other countries out there other than the US. So the fact that Podgagement has got all of the international chart data from all of the charts, and there are a lot of them, for both Apple Podcasts and for Spotify, is, I think, really impressive. So that's an excellent thing. Pocket Casts, we just mentioned it, but it's worthwhile mentioning again. They're now supporting the podcast funding feature. That's now supported by, it's supported by a ton of podcast hosting companies. Buzzsprout, our sponsor, Blueberry, Captivate, RSS.com, Transistor, and many others. You can also see the big support button in Pod News podcast pages as well, which is pretty cool. How popular is the podcast funding tag, Sam?
Well, according to our friend John Spurl, over 66,000 podcasts so are using the funding tag. It's the second most popular tag after the transcript tag. Now, that's quite interesting because that's John's data. I assume that's through OP3, James, that he's pulling that. I'm not quite sure how he's getting the data.
I think he's getting that directly from the podcast index.
Okay.
But that's looking really good, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had a look at PodEngine, who also have a similar page where they do stats on the number of tags that are supported and the popularity of. It's an open free page. They've done an analysis of 633,000 podcasts. I look at some of the data and I go, not sure, because the Locked is the most popular, and we know that Locked is not even really used by many people. It may be in there because hosts hope it.
Locked is the most used. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most popular. Locked and GUID are the most used. Podcast funding, according to this, says it's at number 4, just below Podcast Medium. But I suppose Locked, GUID, and Medium are all totally automatic, and they don't require anything from a podcaster, whereas Podcast funding, clearly does. So that's the thing. Now,
you did ask earlier, would other apps join in the game of adding funding to their app? And you mentioned Overcast. I'm afraid to tell you, James, Marco has said a big no. He said there's no safety in numbers with Apple's IAP demands, at least not until you're the size of an Uber or Meta. The entire market of podcast apps outside of Apple and Spotify is peanuts to Apple. They'd crush us all without a second thought. God, he's hopeful. If the thought we weren't giving them a cent they deserve. So any chance of Overcast, your favourite podcast app, actually adding the funding tag, well, you now know from the creator that's a fat no.
Yes, although Overcast did actually roll out the funding tag before the funding tag was even a thing. They looked through for Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee URLs and added those as a support this podcast link. Marco then took that link out for two reasons. Firstly, because he was worried about Apple and what Apple would actually say. But by the looks of it, has never actually had that conversation with Apple. But also, secondly, very few people were using it. I think more people would be using it now because I think it is more visible everywhere. So I'm still hopeful that Marco does try to put it back in. It's not a complicated thing to put in, but one person responded to Marco saying, "Are you okay, hun? You might need a therapist." Because all Marco is talking about is how dreadful Apple is. Another person has said, that Tim Cook is the worst thing to happen to Apple and blah blah blah. So there's a lot of that going on. But I think when you have a look at who supports the funding tag now, Podcast Addicts, which I know isn't available on Apple, but nevertheless supports it. Cast-O-Matic, Podcast Guru, you've got Pocket Casts now. It is a growing thing. And of course, Apple Podcasts kind of supports it anyway in terms of links. If we were to link to our Patreon from our description, it would appear there. So, so it's kind of supported, but not overtly. So I think we should just keep on pushing and see what happens. But anyway, we will see what happens there.
Now, little bit of news from YouTube, nothing major, but they've added a new AI tool to generate free background music for videos and podcasts. We were talking about music from Spotify, licensed music earlier. One of the things that they did say, though, in it was they're building in a music remixer that lets you restyle popular songs to add to your shorts. Again, I wonder how they're going to do this with licensing.
Yes, I mean, AI and licensing, always interesting. Spotify, of course, adding something quite similar. So, I'm fascinated to see how all of that stuff works.
Now, not directly related to podcasting, we did talk about Netflix getting into podcasting potentially. One of the things they announced this week was they've got a new open AI-powered search. Now, again, I can see a lot of podcasters looking at AI-based search. I can see a lot of companies like Spotify and YouTube doing the same thing. And it's interesting to see Netflix has now moved into that space as well. You can get it, James, if you want. If you've got a Netflix license, you can use it in Australia and New Zealand on the iOS app already. But the rest of the world, we have to wait.
There you go. One of the benefits of living in Australia. One of the many benefits.
Now, let's whiz around some of the apps. What's AntennaPod doing, James?
Oh, AntennaPod is doing something interesting. It has a new feature. This is a podcast app for Android. It's a great replacement for Google Podcasts if you like the simplicity of that. It now has a feature around comments. If the podcast is supporting the social interact tag in one particular flavor, then there will be a comments button and you can click on that and it will go to that particular root message and you can leave a comment there. So the beginning of a way of achieving cross-app comments, which is nice. Now, it doesn't work with Blue Sky. It does, though, work with ActivityPub. So as of yesterday, you will find both Blue Sky and ActivityPub social interact links in the Pod News daily RSS feed.
I haven't got a cheers or applause button, but I would if I could.
Hooray!
Yes.
Yes. And, the more that I am, looking at blue sky and everything else, the more that I'm thinking, I don't know about that.
Yes. Well, there was a big hoo-ha yesterday. The big hoo-ha.
Yes. Yeah, I know, exactly. I mean, all of that Turkish stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, Turkey takedowns.
Yes. Christmas. Yes. So from that point of view, very exciting to see AntennaPod doing that. But also, please, if you would like to comment on any of the news stories that you hear in the Pod News Daily podcast, then use those buttons or similar and leave messages on the on Mastodon there. That would be a good thing. What else is going on? Fountain, I'm sure, are doing something exciting. Don't tell me they're doing something with AI, are they?
Okay, I won't. Move on. Yes, they are doing something with AI. I can't say what. Well, no, I can't.
Oh.
I'll tell you off air, but I can't tell you on air.
I see.
Yes,
Okay.
no, I spoke to Nick, and some of those Chinese walls we're not allowed to have until they want to officially announce. But yes, they're working on some AI stuff. So that's very exciting. Snippets that you can pick up. Podverse, we know Mitch is working on a rebuild and hopefully it's coming soon. He was boosting on the Podcasting 2.0 show, which means that he's risen his head above the parapet and he's coming out to play again. So that's good news. And also somebody who's been off the scene for a while is Martin from Podfriend, and he posted about Podfriend 3 coming soon. So yes.
Yes, which is very excellent. Martin always comes up with some really nice ideas in terms of UX, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. Now, many podcast apps, like those ones that we've just mentioned, have consumption data on the shows that their listeners consume. True Fans, of course, as well does. Things like total followers on that app, listens, even completion data as well. But all of that data doesn't come back to podcast creators, partially because there's no standard mechanism to do so. No standard mechanism, at least in terms of doing that automatically. So, of course, you can log in to all kinds of dashboards, the Spotify dashboard, the True Fans Creators dashboard, and various other things, but there's no automatic way of getting that in. So there's a new proposal out there from John Spurlock, the excellent John Spurlock. It's nothing to do with OP3. It's completely separate. It's called Standard Podcast Consumption, or SPC, and it aims to hopefully fix all of that. Sam, you've talked with John, haven't you?
Yes, I reached out to John and I wanted to find out more about what SPC is. So I started off with asking him, what is SPC?
So SPC is basically the result of several conversations that I had at the recent Podcast Movement Evolutions conference, and some other conversation I've been having. And it seems to be in the zeitgeist recently that, hey, some of the apps actually provide portals so that podcasters can view what's going on in the app for their podcasts. I always like to just think about, as a canonical example, the Apple Podcast Connect. So a podcaster could go and log in, see not just the downloads that they get on the server side, but then also what the app only knows. So listens and followers and how long the listener listens to their podcast. And this is actually incredibly useful to the podcast. They get a bit more information about how they're doing, at least for listeners to that app. And that's great because it's kind of like the podcaster puts their work out into the world and they allow all these apps to include it for free usually. And this is one way for the app to say, oh, like you want to be in this app because we're showing you all this great information. Sometimes that can drive how you do your show, but even not, at least there's some signal out there that people are listening and, you're doing a good job. So it's a lot of work for apps to construct these portals. You can imagine you need a whole team to do this, and it's hard work collecting these metrics and then displaying them. And that works for apps of a particular size, but it would be nice if any app could give this information or make it available to podcasters in a simple way, even without doing a portal. So just something where the high level aggregate numbers could be communicated without having to do a portal or without having to do a lot of extra work. There's been a lot of proposals on how to do this. Most of them, I feel, have not thought about the app's point of view. If you think about it, the apps are the one collecting this information, and it's hard work developing an app. And really, we ought to make whatever standard we do here as easy as possible to do for an app, right? To fit into their busy schedule, and something that they can get started on right away. And so the idea of SPC.
What does SPC stand for? Let's get that out of the way first.
SPC stands for Standard Podcast Consumption. So it's an open standard to define 5 standard consumption metrics. And so this is probably what will be interesting for most of your listeners, not only the apps. So hosts, listeners, podcasters, what are the kinds of things, if we had to ask for a handful, what would be the most impactful metrics to collect and display to podcasters? And so again, this is where the conversations come into play. And like, what if we can ask for this, but what if we can calculate this based off of that? So really, I think part of this project is defining those metrics. And so if you go to the spec, there's a link off of livewire.io/SPC. It links to a one-pager that anyone can read. But I think the really important thing here is the metrics themselves. So really, there's 2 metrics at the show level, and then there's 3 metrics at the episode level. And again, these are aggregate metrics. This is not like, I don't know if you remember the RAD initiative from back in the day from NPR, that was like, at this particular point, we send all these webhooks. It's nothing like that. These are numbers. These are aggregate numbers. So this is, you have 354 followers. This isn't this particular listener at this location listen to this episode. That's not at this level at all. The idea of this is to go big and to say any app, any existing app today could implement this without waiting for anything on the server side and without changing really anything that the podcast apps are already doing. So a lot of these apps are already computing this sort of thing internally. And it's just a matter of let's get on the same page and define a mechanism for how to make them accessible to hosts. So again, it's probably worthwhile to go over the metrics if you want to just say,
yeah, please.
And everyone think about them. The 2 show level metrics are follower count. So this is something that I think we all know what a follower is at this point. It's basically what used to be called in the olden days a subscriber, but it's something that a person that's listening to a podcasting app has actually made a particular interest in a particular show, whether that's for auto downloading or for notifications. It's basically a way to call out like this listener is interested in hearing from this show. And again, this is something at the show level. The second metric is all-time total listeners. And so it's like, this is a number that always goes up and to the right. So it's like, how many listens have you gotten on this show? Or how many all-time listeners?
Hang on. I just want to be clear on that, because the word listens and listeners are 2 different metrics in my head.
Correct. So a listener is a person, right?
Yeah.
A person listens.
A person could have multiple listens to a single episode. So yes, I was just trying to be clear.
Exactly.
What are you referring to? Listener?
So at the show level, listeners. So it's like how many listeners are coming to your show over time. And this is just one big all-time metric.
Okay.
Now, where things get interesting is at the episode level. And again, if something is aggregatable at the episode level, you could create show level metrics based off of these as well. But there's basically 3 defined standard metrics at the episode level. One is episode level daily listens. And so again, that's a listen in this standard is defined as anything greater than 1 second. Episode level all-time listener count. Again, it's very similar to the show level listener count, but since those can't be aggregated, this needs to be defined at the episode level as well. And then probably the most important metric, which is something that came out of a lot of conversations that I would not have expected, is the listener histogram at the episode level. And so what this is not, what a particular listener does, but it's basically among all listeners, those nice charts that you kind of see on YouTube or Apple, where you see 100% of the listeners start out with an episode, and then it sort of falls off over time. So 90% fall off at minute 2, then 50% fall off by the time it gets halfway through, et cetera. And these are aggregate numbers. This is just 100%, 90%, 50% at a 1 minute resolution. What's great about this metric is that not only the app knows this, so this is like all new information to the podcaster. The podcaster would love to know this information, but it also can be used to calculate things like listen time. So listen time is a metric that I know a lot of people are talking about, but you can actually compute that via listens and the histogram. The other thing is streams. So some apps actually define a stream as greater than 60 seconds, that sort of thing. But if you have these episode level histograms, that also falls out, right? Because you can see, this dropped off after minute 2, that sort of thing. So this, again, the whole intention of this spec is to be as simple as possible for the apps. And so any redundant metric was kind of thrown out. It's like, we want the minimal amount, so you have to do the minimum amount of work. And again, all of these are optional, so the app can choose to ignore the ones they don't want to provide. But those are the 5 we're asking for to start out.
Okay, so I'm going to play slightly devil's advocate for a minute and just take 2 steps back as well. So Dan Misener from Bumper was one of the first people I recall talking about listen time and percent completed as 2 vital metrics, because a 3-minute podcast like James Cridland's Pod News Daily, you could say I listen to only 7 minutes a week, but actually that could be 100% of each show. So as opposed to 7 minutes of Pod News Weekly, which might only be 10% of the show. So percent completed is an equally important metric. Now, Dan at Bumper then managed to get his clients to give him access to Apple Connect, Spotify Connect, I think it's called, YouTube's dashboard. And through some mechanism, they've created a dashboard for clients to aggregate that first-party data using the metrics, very much the ones that you described. And so they've done a non-standard, non-industry open method, but they've done a Bumper method to get that first-party data into an aggregated dashboard, which is great for the client, but it's singular because each individual client has to give Bumper the information individually to allow them to access their account. So it's not scalable. And so I think what you're trying to do is answer that question. I think Dan Granger from Oxford Road as well was asking for this similar first-party data standardization of metric data so that it could be aggregated somewhere to allow them to then, for whether it's advertising purposes or for creator purposes, give them some first-party data metrics. So I can see where you've come from. I can see what you're asking for, and I can see the value in what it would do. If you're a creator on many apps, you've already got that in your siloed app. That's the problem, though. Why would the app want to give that data to a third party like a host or an analytics service when fundamentally that first party data is the gold dust that the app has on what that creator did in their app? And maybe they might make that a chargeable service, which is the only revenue that they might have. So I get the reason why people want that data, but can you give me a reason why the apps would release that data?
I think the question sort of answers itself. And why does Apple release this information? Apple
but it doesn't actually. It doesn't. No, it gives it to creators, but it doesn't give it to hosts. And I've long argued that with delegated delivery from hosts supporting Apple and doing all the hard work, Apple doesn't need that data. They don't do advertising. They don't have a need to retain that data, unlike YouTube or Spotify. And Apple should release that data because they actually don't charge for that either, as you just correctly said. But they don't release it. Spotify and YouTube, I can't imagine, will release it. So we're not going to really talk about them because I don't think whatever we do in the industry is going to get them to open the door to their closed platform. But I'm talking about some of the Podcasting 2.0 apps. I'm talking about some of the Overcasts and the Pocket Casts and people like that. Isn't this the data that gives them some economic value that they want to then share with the creators directly rather than allow it to be aggregated into the host? And I'm just playing devil's advocate because I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that app developers will say. Why should I give you this data when actually that's the data I want?
It's probably worth getting into the mechanism at this point, actually. It basically was inspired by what the app Overcast already does today. Mm-hmm. So Overcast It's not really a podcast 2.0. It doesn't really implement any of those standards. But for the longest time, Overcast has sent, every time its server fetches the podcast feed, it will send how many followers that particular show has on their platform. This is something not everyone knows. And the hosts could show this information, and some do. But that's actually a very elegant way to do things. And I think it is probably born out of the fact that the developer of Overcast is a podcaster, right? So he's aware of the value that any information that's coming out of how your show is doing is available, I would say, to the podcaster. I would leave hosting companies, analytics companies, because that quickly gets into, sort of their interest. But I'm really defining a standard here for the podcaster. So this approach scales to, yes, if you have a hosting company as a podcaster, but it also scales down to if you're self-hosting your feed, if you're putting it on S3, this particular spec still works. Basically, the way it works is instead of sending the followers directly inside of the user agent like Overcast does, it just sends back a URL that's kind of a secret URL. Then the podcaster can go out and query followers and all of these other standard metrics forever going forward. So it's kind of nice in that it requires no new work from the app's point of view. The app, yes, it needs to collect the metrics. But if you think about some of the other approaches that have been proposed, they propose making daily calls for every single podcast in their directory, which is, if you think about it, somewhat unrealistic for even the most intrepid apps that want to kind of do the right thing as far as standards. So the way this works is that the app, let's say it's Pocket Cast, for example, they need to implement one new API endpoint on their server. So they say api.pocketcasts.com/SPC. That's the endpoint that any podcaster can go and get their metrics, but they need to know the key, and that key is sent in the user agent. That's basically it. That's the entire spec.
Okay.
The hard part is having all the apps actually creating the metrics in the same way and making them available via this standard endpoint. And what's cool about this is the existing portals, they don't have to change their portal to support this. This is just a very high level, single kind of computer to computer call that is like in addition to. So this doesn't mean any existing app like Apple and Spotify, which could actually implement this spec very easily, they don't have to change their portals. They just need to implement this one API endpoint. The benefits of a standard endpoint then, and it really benefits kind of the long tail podcast apps, is that each host doesn't have to create a point-to-point integration. So they don't have to scrape Apple's website and Spotify's website, which is what folks are doing now. But they can just implement one SPC integration. Then any app, large or small, the app that people are working on in the garage, they automatically get included in this. And that's kind of the benefit of podcasting, right? Is that there are thousands of apps. Each show has a different breakdown of where their listeners listen. But this mechanism doesn't require meetings back and forth. It basically is just like using the calls that the apps are already making. So in that sense, it should be a very simple lift for apps. And especially apps like TrueFans, you actually keep track of, even at a lower level, you keep track of like this listener does this and publishing that like at the social layer. It would be very easy for you to do this in addition to, right? And again, these are high level aggregate numbers. This is not meant to replace anything. It's really in addition to. The other thing is it's in addition to downloads. So downloads, everyone knows about downloads at this point and their pros and cons, but that's something that can be measured on the server side. This is something that's completely self-reported and that needs to be sanity checked still against the download. So the download is still very important in this world. This is just new information that all the apps are collecting now, but not really making available. And the problem to be solved here is how to make that available in a standard and simple way.
Yeah, and I think I pinged you and said, look, having read the spec, given the fact we have all that data, making it available at the meta level, which is what you're asking for, is a pretty much a no-brainer. And making that available to the host related to the podcast that we're collecting the data on, again, is a no-brainer because you've got an SPC endpoint so that they can then talk to that endpoint and then interrogate the podcast that they're hosting for the information. I think in my head, there are a couple of things I might try. One is certainly to allow the creator to give permission for that data to be collected. So it's a opt-in rather than an opt-out model. And then the other one that I would probably be looking for is if we are giving this data for free back to the host, maybe there's some preferential co-marketing that we could do together. But that's just from me as a CEO of an app trying to improve.
Yes, exactly. I see the business wheel spinning there, Sam. But really, this is more about more high level. Like, there's actually a self-marketing aspect to it. There's even folks that aren't listening to Pod News here. They will learn about SPC because of the mechanism itself. So they'll see these user agents coming in with a URL and say, oh, what's this? Click on it. Oh, this is nice, right? I love these metrics. This is great. So there's kind of a nice self-marketing aspect to this that the podcaster immediately sees the benefit. And that's the whole point of this. And the podcaster itself has a good feeling about having their work presented in that app. And that's really the whole point of this. You ask why an app would do this. It's to give their app the best light, right? The best reputation for podcasters.
Yeah. And I think, taking my CEO of True Fans hat off and putting a more of an evangelist stroke pod news hat on, I think the right place for this to be aggregated is at the host level, because the host has a holistic view of all the apps. So, for example, yes, Fountain might implement it, Podcast Guru, Podverse, Podfriend, Pocket Casts, but the host of that one podcast, which is now distributed to all of those apps, if there was an SPC endpoint, could bring all the data back from those apps into one analytics dashboard to give the creator that total overview, not that siloed overview just from one app, which is what we would provide only to them. We would only give them a True Fans view of the world, which is what Spotify, Apple, and YouTube do. And that may be not enough. And I do think the right place is at the host, where they can give you that bird's eye view of where your listeners are spread across multiple apps and where the engagement may be highest on one of the apps or whatever. That will help creators immensely.
I think you said it really well. I couldn't say it any better than that, actually. The hosts in this world, right? Let's say apps start using this mechanism and make their API endpoint available. The work is actually put onto the host to do the aggregation. And to me, that makes sense because, like you just said, it's like that is the value that they're bringing to the podcaster. They can ignore these metrics as well. So the nice thing is the app is not making any new work that is not being used. So the host can call this endpoint every year if they want. They could not call it, or they could call it every day. It depends on what they want to do. And there's batching built in so that they can request metrics for more than one show at a time. That's something that was built into the spec. So I encourage everyone to go read it. And I think if you're an app developer, this is something that you could do relatively easily. The only requirement is that you have to have a server, right? You have to have something that can host an API, and with serverless platforms, you can do that as well. But most good apps will have a feed server, right? That's like crawling all the feeds, and that's also necessary for this. It's worth calling out again that there's nothing listener specific in this. So, if I'm the podcast app and I'm requesting audio, that's where a lot of analytics are done today. That's where the analytics prefixes can see this. That is not being modified in this. So that can still work the same way it does today. So no need to change the client. The only thing that the app has to do is add this SPC endpoint. And then when they server fetch the RSS feeds for every podcaster, send the particular user agent. So just to be clear, there's no listener IP leakage anywhere here. And what's nice about that, we talk about the development work, but there's also policy work involved in some of these changes. We wouldn't want a spec that caused everyone to create massive changes to their existing privacy policies. And what's nice about this is if you look at most apps' privacy policies, they already include this. They already include, even if you look at Overcast, for example, hey, we create aggregate listening stats, non-identifying aggregate numbers based on each show. And that sort of makes sense. That's not compromising the listener's privacy. But those are the high-level information that we collect. And that's all this does. It just makes that available to the podcaster itself.
I think, as you said, easy to implement, pretty quick because the apps have got the data. I think we're going to try it. I did mention that to you in an email. So where is the proposal in terms of finality? Is it something that we can start to use against and start to get case study examples out? Or should we wait for more peer review before we start to get our teeth into it?
I would say it's an open idea and it's out there. It's a single page, so anyone can read through it. I'd love to have some discussions about it. I've been talking about it for quite some time now in private, but then also in public. I'd love to get the feedback from public, but you could definitely start this if you're an intrepid app developer. You could start doing this today. One thing I didn't mention that you can probably tell, but it does not require any new RSS feed tags on the server side. So this does not require any new namespaces or any changes to your feed contents at all. So that's kind of another benefit of this, is that apps don't need to wait for podcasters to implement this. They can start sending this whenever they implement it themselves. And again, like I said, with the self-marketing aspect of it, podcasters are going to start to see this in their logs and be like, oh, what's this? Oh, interesting. Let me Google SPC. Oh, this is great. The specific feedback I'd love to get is, again, those standard metrics, because we'd like to have a world where the apps are doing this work to collect these metrics. It'd be nice to have a very crisp definition of, yep, we've all agreed these are good metrics to collect. And so that's where I could see I'd want a little bit of feedback. But you could definitely, if you're collecting these already, you could definitely implement this today without any major changes.
I have an expression which is called go ugly early, which is just get on with it. And that's often
absolutely
how I do it. So I think we will just go ugly early. We will try it and we will see what the feedback is, because that's the best way to iterate. Now, the one caveat I will put in there, and I think it's only because I think it's going to require a lot more work, is the histogram element. I think the other metrics that you mentioned are simple, easy, quick, aggregated numbers. I think the histogram is something that we would have to then try and put that together, because that's high value. I get it. But it's also something that we haven't done ourselves yet. Now, we capture that data weirdly already because we do a per second billing because of what I call remote items and wallet switching or value time splits, whichever word you want to pick. We have to track shows like Adam Curry's Boostergram Ball for when he does a switch to an audio artist and then a switch back to himself for the wallet payments. So we already do a per second billing. So I'm pretty sure we've got all the data anyway. I just think how we put it into an array will be the next challenge. But that's a minor challenge, I think.
That's the fun part, right, Sam?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, where do you see this going, John? I mean, have you extrapolated in your mind where you might want to see this go next?
Well, I think it's fairly self-contained. I would love to see, like you were mentioning, early adopters for the app side. Because again, if we have apps actually presenting these, then you could imagine a standard connector that hosts could use to connect to it. But it's so simple, they could just write it once themselves. I'd love to see some hosts actually integrate it. But that's sort of step 2. Step 1 is apps. So I've already had a bunch of conversations with the apps that are possibly targeted by this. Mm-hmm. But I would love anyone to get in touch if they have any questions or anything about it. But that's really where it's going, is just like telling apps about it and getting their feedback on it as well.
So one of the things we were looking at, as I said, there are a number of people who've been looking at this, the performance tag and Benjamin Bellamy, and we were looking at something around the verified tag. So I'm very keen for Podcasting 2.0 apps to implement the verified tag. I've been trying to do this for 2 years, and Apple then came in and simply told the hosts to do it, and they all fell in line, which is wonderful. I wish we could do that. But they all implemented the verified tag with the TXT tag, and so now they all know how to do it. It's very easy to replicate. So that's step 1. Step 2, we've been asked to create a True Fans API so that people can post directly to our directory for feedback, which then opens up the door for us to provide more data. So I will very happily do SPC as a level where we will just look at partner hosts that will work with us. And then, quid pro quos, hopefully from there in terms of marketing. But I think there's another level, which is then, I don't know if you've spent any time with it. It's something I'm very excited and keen on. It's called L402, which is the ability to use an API and have micropayments based on the volume of type of data that goes over the API. So Nathan Gathright uses it for transcribe.fm, and also Russell Harrower over at Pod2 uses it for audiobook payments. So I wonder whether the next layer, because you mentioned that most apps, True Fans included, have more data than the ones that you mentioned, more metrics, and whether we then could have that data sent back to those hosts who want even greater detail, but that's a payment model. Because as I said, the data that we have as apps, first-party data, is really the only really USP that we have. And if we then just give away that for free, we've lost our USP. I think that's going to be where we are. So I think level 1, from the metrics you've described, I think we should all implement, but level 2 may be a chargeable model. If hosts really want that data because they see value in it, then maybe they need to pay for it, or creators pay for it to be aggregated in their hosts. I don't know how that will work.
I can see that as a possibility. Spotify today gives you very rich demographics and that sort of information. And that's not something that this standard provides. I like the way that you describe it as a deeper level, right? So the SPC are just the standard 5 metrics, very high level, numbers only. And then, yes, there's hosts and apps can work on possibly additional payload fields, right? So you could say we have a special mechanism to go deeper. But again, the idea with this spec is to kind of go above a level than, the newer apps. It's like every podcast app. So this is going really wide here. So any app that's out there today or that in the future doesn't even know about any of these new standards can just implement this particular spec. It has no dependencies on a particular namespace or any other tags. Nice.
John, remind everyone, where can they go again to find it if they want to read it?
So I have a link on the Livewire site. So it's livewire.io/SPC.
John Spurl, thank you so much for putting this together. And if you want to give John some feedback, go and have a little read of the one-pager, which makes it nice, handy and quick to read. And John, I'm sure you're looking forward to getting feedback from the community.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Always great to be here.
And you, mate. See you soon.
The very excellent John Spurlock there talking about standard podcast consumption. What's your thoughts now that you've heard John talking about it?
So I'm going to have a couple of hats on here. I'm going to put... No, I've got to, because I sit on both sides of the fence. And so with my Pod News hat on, with my support for Podcasting 2.0, I see the problem. We talked about Dan Granger talking about something called an open podcast protocol. We've heard from Dan Misener, who's scraping data for their customers from the dashboards of Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. So we know that the problem exists, and this is a interesting solution potentially to get lightweight metadata, which is non-specific to an individual, so no breaking of personal privacy, which is critical. Yeah. And on that side of it, I think great. And yes, all the apps have it. We have that data. You can see it in our show notes, James, in the graphic I've left, but I'm sure every other app has, total listens times, total followers, etc. The problem I've got is why. It's not what or how, it's why. Why would the apps do this? Now, with my Pod News hat on and loving Podcasting 2.0, I'm like, for the greater good of the ecosystem, for the counterweight to Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And I go, absolutely, that's what we should do. And then I sit with my True Fans hat on and I go, but that is the unique identifiable data that we could maybe create a pro account for, or charge users to see the dashboard, right? And if I just give that away for free, then what have I done? Now, it's not that the creators, because you said right at the beginning, you said the creators don't get that data. The creators do get that data. They don't get it aggregated. What the hosts want is that data, because all they have is download data. They don't have first-party data. And to enhance their analytics, they want first-party data. To address the advertisers, creators want a holistic view of first-party data. And it should, again, with my Pod News hat on, it should sit with the host and not just with the apps, because Buzzsprout, for example, right? This podcast is on multiple apps, but if all they got was, or all we got was the view from one app, we wouldn't know holistically how many people listen to this, how many follow it, etc. So we do need it aggregated at the host level. So I've got two hats. One is a business hat and one is a technical hat. And the technical hat says, yes, I understand what John's done. It's a lightweight metadata aggregation to the host level, which gives us a way of looking at more than just downloads as a number, which we said is wrong because it's not a listen. So we'd have one step forward with how many followers, maybe that's a better metric for advertisers. And then later on, how many listens, and actually the histogram element of actually where people listened. So I can see it all, but I can also see from the app's point of view, why are we giving this away for free? I don't get it.
Yeah, and I think this is where the idea falls over in that, if it costs someone to, if it costs somebody, I don't know, 2 weeks worth of engineering time to produce this API, who's earning out of that? What is the benefit in terms of doing that work rather than making the player better or making your search better? There is some benefit in terms of being nice to the creators that you have on your platform, but that's kind of as much of a benefit there. I think I can certainly see that. I think the nice thing about John's SPC proposal is that it doesn't need any fiddling around with RSS feeds,
Nope.
and it is by design totally, firstly, privacy respecting, but also secondly, by design, the only people who can see this data are the hosting companies, because of the way that it works. It's a very clever system that we can all start using today. And in fact, Overcast has been doing this for the last 5, 6, 7 years. If you look at your RSS feed server logs, then you can actually see in there how many followers you have on Overcast. That's all that Overcast gives you. It doesn't give you anything else. But just sort of seeing that is actually quite useful. But the only people who can see that are your hosts. And I had somebody saying, "Oh, that's brilliant. I'd love to find out how many followers I've got on Overcast." And I said, "Well, you're hosting with Megaphone, so you need to talk to Megaphone." So that's about as far as it goes. But I do think it's a really, neat tool. Again, it comes back to, well, who's going to pay to put this kind of information into the podcast apps? Who is going to end up doing that? And then you've got on the other side, you've got that some podcast apps will want to inflate their numbers so that podcasters talk about their podcast apps more. And so you've got a whole new sort of certification side here, because all you're getting back is whatever that particular podcast app thinks is a play. And that, again, begins to get a little bit concerning. So I think it's a really nice idea from John. I'm just, and I would love to see it taken up. Absolutely love to see it taken up, but I just can't see right now anybody beginning to be particularly excited, particularly when, of course, 70% of all podcast plays are with Apple and with Spotify, neither of whom, sadly, would look at this spec and actually work out how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I've argued long and hard that Apple don't need this data. They don't use it for advertising purposes.
Yeah.
They could give delegated delivery hosts who support them a quid pro quo and give this data back to them, but they won't. So that's a shame. Spotify won't. It's gold dust to them, so they're not going to do it, and nor is YouTube. So unfortunately, I had said to John that, look, I would look at it, but I would do it on a business level deal. Now, what I mentioned was I would approach a host as a partner and say, look, I'll give you these 4 or 5 bits of metadata, but in exchange, you will add us to the verify tag. You will promote us as a destination point app on your website, and in return, we will give you the data. Now, I haven't done that with anyone yet, but that's the sort of thing I would look at. So it wouldn't be a chargeable element, but it'd be a scratch my back, you scratch your back type exchanged business deal. That would be the starting point for me.
Yeah, no, indeed. It's going to be really interesting seeing whether or not this goes anywhere. I have to say there are a couple of related proposals out there. Russell Harrower is doing something called the performance tag, which I simply don't understand, so I can't really comment on. But Benjamin Bellamy, I love Benjamin. I think he's really, really good. He's come up with something which he is calling privacy first accurate audio analytics. It's not privacy first. It leaks the IP address of the listener, and it's not accurate because it could say anything. And I've told Benjamin this, and I don't think he's very happy with me in telling him this. But, so looking at where John has come at this, I think what John is really good at doing is really cleverly thinking about the problem, thinking about a solution, and working out a really good way of achieving that. And I think, like any great engineer, the issue isn't the technical way that he has done that. The issue is more around the politics and the business side. I think from that point of view, it's a real shame, because I would really like to see SPC working well. I've sent it to a number of people saying, I think this is really good. Why don't you have a look at this? I mean, one way of thinking about it is, could it be that some of the larger podcast networks who want this data, or indeed the Podcast Standards Project, actually sponsor this feature to be added to some of the larger podcast apps? Is that something that we can actually get? We would really like it if you would put SPC into this app, and we will give you 10 grand if you do it.
Yeah, look, it's value for value. If you really want this data, how much do you value it? And give it to the apps as some sort of value, and there you go. Yeah, I can't say I expect the PSP to do it, and I can't say I expect it's going to happen from an individual host offering that. But you never know.
Well, anyway, moving on,
James. Yes.
There were a few other tiny little things which I thought were quite cool. PodPace, which is a new tool for podcast speech normalization. Did you take a peek at this, Sam?
No. I thought my speech was normal already, so I didn't think I needed it.
So what this does is it actually analyzes speaker words per minute. So, for example, if I speak much faster than Sam does, you could put this show into PodPace and tell it to slow me down to the same speed as Sam, or speed me up to the same speed Sam up to the same speed as me. And it would automatically do that. That's how this technology would actually work. I think it's quite neat. I'm sure that it would not sound particularly brilliant, but it's a really interesting idea. And, as I keep on saying, the only reason really why I use Overcast over any other podcast app is the playback engine. And if the playback engine is as good in other podcast apps and Pocket Casts comes close, then I will move over there. Because 99.5% of all of the time spent in a podcast app is listening to a podcast, yet we spend probably 10% of the time on the actual playback engine, if that. So anyway, I thought that PodPace was interesting. It's worth a peek. What's the website address? Oh, it's a complicated GitHub thing, so you can ignore that. But yes, worth a peek. Also in there, just very quickly, Faircamp version 1.3. Faircamp is kind of like Bandcamp, a way for you to sell your music, but you can host your music on a serverless web server. So you can very quickly do that. What's the phrase I'm looking for? Static server alternative. That's what I'm actually looking forward to. That's what I'm meaning to say. So Faircamp has been just a music service. It now includes full support for hosting podcasts as well. So all you need is static hosting somewhere, and you can do that. I thought that was an interesting idea, and I'm surprised that there aren't more static server podcast hosting tools out there. You could probably build one quite easily using Hugo. And finally, Aaron McQuaid has produced something which is quite nice. It will produce a podcast app for any podcast, and you can install it on your phone. It's a PWA, which I think is quite neat. You're doing something similar to that, aren't you?
We are, but I mean, again, let's not talk about True Fans right now. Let's keep it out. I've been told and warned that I should keep my True Fans part to the end. Not by you, just to hasten to add, it wasn't you.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, well, okay, it was John. Okay, I'll throw him under the bus. No, and look, I have that tightrope walk between talking about the industry and talking about my own app.
Absolutely, and I think that's absolutely fair enough. Yeah. Well, let's talk about True Fans in just a little bit. What's this about Albi? Do I really?
Well, yeah, no, I had a good old chat.
Do I still care about Albi?
Yes, you should, because it still works. I mean, much the belief that it doesn't. It does. The Olby Hub is not for end users. It is for apps. It is for podcast networks. I've got sub accounts on my hub for Sam at Get Olby, for a wallet if I want it. So it does work. It's just so complex, to the extent that even I had to ring up Moritz to walk me through creating a sub account, because I was in fear of deleting the wrong thing or not adding the right thing. And even when he walked me through, I still was like clicking buttons with no idea what I was doing. But it worked. It strangely all works. But Saturn, if you remember, was one of their development platforms that we used to use in the early days to look at all of the different...
to look at boosts and things, yeah.
Yeah, they have sent an email out, I guess, to everybody. I got one which said, because it said hi there, so clearly personalised, which is if they don't get 1 million sats a month in contributions from people, they're going to close Saturn down. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I suppose, I suppose that's one way of doing it, isn't it?
Well, they do it with the Olby Hub. I mean, they charge you a number of sats to keep your hub up, and if you want to have a hub, that's what it costs you. I think they're saying, look, I don't think anyone's using it. We're not developing it. Does anyone really want it? Here's the amount we need to keep the lights on. If nobody meets that amount, well, let's just turn the lights off. I did learn one thing, though, this week, which we are playing with, and it's a good thing for the industry, which is the Olby API allows me to look at all of the transactions from Podverse, Podcast Guru, Podfriend, anyone who's using the Olby API. The Saturn API, which is using that same Olby API, shows every transaction. And so what you can do as a developer is use that API, and we're going to do that to try and pull back boosts. So cross-app comments from paid comments are available through Saturn or through the Olby API, and we might then be able to show those within TrueFans, and other apps could do the same with us. But non-paid comments, no, that won't be available through the Olby API.
Boostergram, super comments, zaps, fan mail, super chats, and email. Our favorite time of the week, it's the Pod News Weekly Review inbox.
Yes, so many different ways to get in touch with us. Fan mail by using the link in our show notes, or super comments on TrueFans or boosts everywhere else, or email, and we share any money that we make equally, Sam and I. So thank you to all of the people who have sent in boosts and stuff. And we have had some boosts, which is excellent. I've got them in front of me. Sam doesn't. So thank you, Neil Velio. 10 out of 10 for the Spice Girls reference, featuring 3 UK podcast companies merging.
Yes.
I'd have given you 11 out of 10 if you'd opted for 3 is Family from Dana Dawson.
Wow, okay. Obscure.
I've never heard
No, nor have I.
3 is Family from Dana Dawson. Never heard it before. Anyway, thank you for that, Neil. Lyceum, a bag of Richards, 1,111 sats. Sam, did you say Haribo's?
I did.
You did say Haribo's last week. It was founded in Germany in 1920. The candy brand is very popular in Scandinavia. I tell you what, the candy brand is very popular everywhere, including in the US. So Haribo does particularly well, but the types of stuff that you can get differ between each country, I've noticed. Not that I like that sort of thing. Lyceum, thank you. Silas on Linux, a row of ducks, 2222 sats. I have lifetime gold with their line as well. Oh, get you. Except it is gold when you don't crash and your lifetime continues. I only take €16 flights with Ryanair. Oh dear. Due to giving all of my other money to you. Hooray. Fully planned and booked transport and stay for the podcast show. Cheers, he says. Well, that's excellent. So thank you for doing that. Seth, 503 sats. Keep up the good work reporting. I love the banter between you two. Your interviews are top notch. Sam, your interviews are top notch.
Hang on, you're about to do one, so he might have meant you as well.
Oh yes. So, I mean, that interview with Maya that I'm doing tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, that's going to be brilliant.
Double espresso, you'll be fine.
Thank you, Seth, for that. 2222 sats from Bruce, the ugly quacking duck. Thanks for the extra 73. Well, thank you so much. A friendly note to a fellow superfan. This is Lyceum, but he's wanting to send a friendly note to the late bloomer actor. Crikey. Time to take the Starship and have a space flight to the top of the leaderboard. Game on. 1701 sats.
I know exactly what that reference is. So he's basically using the True Fans leaderboard. He's top of it at the moment, and he's pushing for David Clark to come and get his leadership off. Yes.
There you go. This is the benefit of gamification.
It is.
I'm beginning to get what you're doing after all. So thank you.
Thank God you are, because I haven't.
Thank you to all of those people sending us boosts or super comments or whatever it is that you call. What do you call them on?
Super comments, yeah.
Super comments. There you go. Thank you for those. Much appreciated. You can use True Fans if you like to send us some super comments on there. You can also click that link you'll find in our show notes to send us a fan mail through our sponsor Buzzsprout. They make those fan mail links available to everybody, and it's a super easy way. If you're listening on your mobile phone, it'll just open up your text app and give you a local number to text to, and it comes to us, which is very cool. Yes, worth a peek, buzzsprout.com for that. And thank you also to our power supporters, weekly.podnews.net. 18 excellent people who are all giving us actual money every single week or so. We should spend some money giving people beer in London. So I think that's what we're going to do.
We are.
But anyway, thank you so much to Star Tempest, to Brian Ensminger, David John Clark, James Burt, John McDermott, Claire Waite Brown, Ms. Eileen Smith, the aforementioned Neil Velio, also Rocky Thomas, Jim James, David Marsell, Cy Jobling, Rachel Corbett, Dave Jackson, Mike Hamilton, Matt Medeiros, Marshall Brown and Cameron Moll. All excellent people. Thank you for doing that. Much appreciated.
James Burt did a very posh gig, just one of our, obviously, our power supporters.
Yes.
He did a podcast at the very posh London venue, the Decant Group, and with Catherine Ryan, a brand new podcast with Catherine Ryan, and Chisora and Genius, but I don't know who they are. But Catherine Ryan is a very famous Canadian comedian over here now.
Yes.
And it's very well done. So, yes, congratulations to James.
Excellent. Many congratulations, James. Hurrah.
Hurrah! Now, what have we done? Very quickly, then, we've added one-click withdrawal for sats to creators. So when you get money in your creators dashboard on TrueFans, you can now take your money straight out via Apple Pay or Google straight into your Stripe account that you set up, and yep, there it is, one click.
Very cool. Very nice.
The other thing we added was a feature that I've wanted called paid chapters. So you can have a freemium episode, but make one chapter within that episode paid to unlock it. So yes.
Okay. Does that work with OpenRSS, or do I have to log into the TrueFans?
No, we haven't made it a secure RSS capability yet. So look, if you wanted to cheat, you go around the back, you get the MP3 and you get away with it. But we're just trying to put in the first part of it, which is, look, if you want to, the creator's saying, look, this content's a little bit more valuable. Please give me a bit of money to unlock it. If you do, it will unlock. Obviously, you can cheat right now. We may turn that into a secure tokenized chapter, but we haven't done that yet.
Yeah. And so the way of, as a creator, saying that this particular chapter is going to be paid for, can I do that through RSS, or do I have to do that through?
Not yet. I'm going to propose it into the GitHub as a idea, but obviously seeing is believing. So we've only done it in the creator's dashboard. So you go in the back end of your creator's dashboard, you see from your RSS all of your chapters, and then you can lock a chapter and set a value for that chapter.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, I was watching a YouTube video the other week of, it's a man called Geomapper, and what he does is he fairly often in his YouTube channel, he will be sent a picture. Maybe it's a picture of your grandfather from 1910, and he's there on a motorbike somewhere in the world, and you want to find out where that photograph was taken. Well, GeoGuessr is his name, and he will find out where that photograph was taken. And the way that he has been doing it up until now is he's been looking at things and going, I think this is in Italy somewhere. I'll go and I'll take a look, and very laboriously goes through Google Maps looking for, it looks like a river and it looks as if it's this big and blah, blah, blah. And so all of that. Anyway, I was watching him doing this last week, and he was doing this for yet another photograph that he has been sent in, and it was somewhere that he knew was in Italy because the person told him. But that's as much as they knew. And he used OpenStreetMap to say, I can see a city wall in this picture. We're also very close to a river. So he went to OpenStreetMap and he said, show me all city walls in Italy which are 500 meters or less away from a river. So he did that particular really tight query onto OpenStreetMap and very quickly found out exactly where that photograph was taken. The real power of OpenStreetMap and what you can do with the data in OpenStreetMap. And that's the power that I'm hoping to get into the podcast location tag. You knew that there was something about podcasting in this, didn't you?
Yes. Mad rambling about, and I found my grandfather, said James.
And I found my grandfather.
Yes.
No, so this is why I've been very excited about the podcast location tag, because I think that there is definitely something there in terms of unleashing the power of OpenStreetMap and the nominatim API that it has access to and all of that sort of thing. With that in mind, the OpenStreetMap IDs are proposed as part of the podcast location tag. There are lots of people that have been using Google Maps, though, because it's relatively good. It's a production-ready system, and you can very easily get lat lons, but you can't obviously get anything more than that. After all of that, Sam, in terms of Google Maps and OpenStreetMap, where are you? Because you've been using Google Maps, haven't you?
We have, and after your berating and cajoling and whatever other words I can think of, yes, we are moving. We are moving across to OpenStreetMaps. Our goal, and it has been for a while, is to allow us to plot on a map the location of podcast creators, and then to allow us to then filter that by category. So initially it might be, tell me all the podcasters in Brisbane. Now tell me all the podcasters in Brisbane who talk about technology and podcasting, as an example. And then it would show you those. I'm hoping that if we can make this work, it will be beneficial to people who want to do in real life meetups for people who are podcasters, because it can be a lonely podcasting thing, sat in front of your mic if you're a solo podcaster. So again, sometimes we are seeing a lot more meetups, actually. I think we've talked about it in the past where people are doing those meetups. And so I think they're good. And also, I remember you showed me a very cool app, sadly closed down, called maps.fm. And we've worked out how to put the cover art instead of the pin, the normal red pin or whatever you would have. So anytime you look at the map, it will now show you the cover art of the podcast. And then we're going to add the filtering capability around that. But yeah, I think it's a nice way to go forward.
I think one of the things that Maps FM did, which I thought was a really clever idea, was it showed you a map of any podcast that was about a winery in this particular region. And again, all of that is possible with OpenStreetMaps. None of that is possible with just lat lons. So because you don't know what the point is. But as soon as you know that this is a winery, then all of a sudden you can plot these things on a map as shows as a winery. Probably not brilliant for podcast apps, but probably really good for different ways into podcasting. And I think that's the reason why I'm so excited about it. So really good to hear that you are moving away from Google Maps and moving into OpenStreetMap on there as well. Finally, you've got a new podcast, it says.
Yes. It's in relation to, I can't talk about True Fans, so where can I talk about it? No, we launched Fan Zone, which was a podcast with me and Claire Waite-Brown to talk about how to use True Fans, and it's a step-by-step guide to each feature and function, and we've got 3 or 4 series of those in the can. But I didn't have anywhere where I just wanted to riff about what we'd done this week and what's going on, and highlight maybe podcast of the week, music of the week, super fan of the week, maybe talk about some industry stuff at a higher level that relates to True Fans, not like we do here. Yeah. And so just to make it something like a 3 or 4 minute, I don't know how long we'll see. Yeah. 3 or 4 minutes is probably half an hour in reality, but whatever length it is, we I remember I said to you, James, would you like to do a half-hour podcast called Pod News Weekly Review? So here we are with a half-hour Pod News Weekly Review. Yeah. So when I set 3 or 4 minutes, I'm probably underestimating dramatically, but we'll see. So Claire's going to be my co-host on that one as well. For the bad person that I am, I haven't really come up with any ingenious name for it so far. So the 2 on the chopping block are currently True Fans Weekly Review or Sam Talks True Fans. And
probably neither of those. But I quite like, yes. But certainly something which is a bit less structured, a bit more open, and maybe a little bit more around the nuts and bolts of actually running a podcast app would be very useful. Yeah. Or a podcast platform would be very useful to a lot of people, I'm sure. Well, you have to tell us when it's out. Go and submit it to newpodcasts.net, and you can make sure that it's in the Pod News newsletter, maybe.
And we have to work out the day. So we've decided we're going to drop it on a Monday because it's so crowded on a Friday and a Thursday. So
nobody wants that. Nobody wants that.
Come on, James. What's happened for you? What's been going on?
Well, firstly, I'm supposed to have been on holiday for the last 2 weeks. If Pod News has looked a little bit thinner than normal. Hopefully it hasn't, but if it has, then that's the reason why. But still, there we are. A few things that I've been trying to do, which have nothing to do with podcasting, but anyway, vaguely interesting, I suppose. One of them is I've been paying for a very nice RSS reader now for many years called InnoReader. In fact, I started paying for that in 2014, so I've been paying for it for over 10 years. Anyway, that runs out, I think, next week. And I thought, I wonder if I can just self-host an RSS reader. And it turns out that I can. There's a really good one called Fresh RSS. It turns out that Podcasting's Adam Curry uses that. So it must be good. So I'm now hosting my own instance of that on one of the boxes that I have, which is nice. It's a very old-fashioned box. I need to rebuild it and move it up to the latest spec. But anyway, so that's super good. So it's been quite fun to have a play around with that. If anybody has any other suggestions in terms of a decent RSS reader, then that would be good. One that is free that I can use. That would be a lovely thing. I tried to move away, Sam, from Gmail last week. How do you think that went?
Handcuffs, golden handcuffs, not a chance.
It was. I mean, so I did it technically. Moved away from Gmail. Had my own IMAP accounts and everything else. That was really easy. Nobody saw any bounced email and everything else. I use a service called forwardemail.net that gets all of my emails anyway. So that was really good. But then I was just really struggling. All of the, because everybody's using webmail these days, all of the actual programs that people use for email, they're all rubbish. You've got Apple Mail, which is kind of the best of a bad bunch. But Apple Mail, I discovered, had some bugs in its IMAP functionality, which was brilliant. So you would mark a mail as read, and it would disappear and then reappear 2 minutes afterwards.
Oh, good.
For some reason, and you'd try again, and it would disappear, and then it would reappear. But it would only do that if it was in folders, and it was just a nightmare. So so I'm back with. I use a desktop app called MimeStream, which is a brilliant app, but it only works with Gmail. So if you're a fan of Gmail, but you don't want to use the web for it and you want to use an actual program, MimeStream is brilliant, and I just simply could not move away from it. So I've tried and I've failed.
Okay. So you're there for life. We're there for life, are we?
I'm clearly there in Gmail for life. I've got 2 Gmail accounts. One of them a paid for one. One of them a free one, which are both in this app, and that's about as far as I go.
Right, here's a shocker for you, James.
Go on.
How many unread mails have you got in your Gmail account?
Oh, well, yes, at the moment. Well, I've tried really hard over the last couple of weeks, but then, of course, I've been on holiday. Currently, I've got 3,438 unread pieces of email in my inbox.
Yeah, I've got 4,429.
There you go. Although I would say that in my important box, I have 18,000. And I also have an automatic label. And the automatic label is stuff that comes in that I automatically just throw in there, and that has 12,500 unread emails. Make it stop. Yes, it's email is just such a nightmare. One of the things genuinely that I think you could get incredibly rich by doing is to be an email trainer, and to go around large companies and train people on how to use email. I'm clearly not the person for that, but training people on how to send email correctly and politely, I think would be amazing. The amount of money that you could save large corporations. When I was at the BBC, I think I got 180 emails a day, and it was all internal emails, and it was all bullshit. Copy somebody important because I want to cover myself if I'm making a change. You know what I mean. It was all that. I'm sure that would be an incredibly rich, field for somebody. I don't want to do it because it sounds boring as anything. But I'm sure that it would be you'd be incredibly rich if you were that person to fix email in large companies. That'd be an amazing thing.
No,
anyway.
I don't think Inbox Zero is ever going to be something you or I ever achieve in my lifetime. Anyway,
no, I don't think it's a thing. The final thing is, so my parents are over from the UK, and one of the things that I did just before they came over is I bought myself something which, for some reason, you can only buy in the UK and the US, and you can't buy here in Australia, and that's a Google Titan key. So this is a thing that you plug into your computer, and you can't log on to an account without it. So my 2 Google accounts are locked with this Titan key. So I have to have the key with me on a what's the word I'm looking for?
Key fob?
On a keyring, yeah.
Yes.
On a keyring. And if I don't have the key with me, then I can't actually log into my account. The Google Titan key is clever. It's got some NFC in it, and it's got various other things. But really, really good. And I'm really surprised that Google isn't selling that in most countries. I can only assume it's a legal thing.
People lose them.
Do they? Is that why?
We used to have it in Netscape. They used to give us this little key thing with a randomly
with the number on, the RSA number,
and then we'd have to plug that in before we could get into Netscape Mail. And God knows how many people forgot it at home, left it with their mothers, didn't have it, blah, blah, blah. No, sorry.
Yeah. You put that onto your... I had that at the BBC, and you put that onto your lanyard. So you need your ID card in order to get into the building, and so therefore you also need the RSA key fob to get into your email. Yes, gosh, that was a time. I don't miss that. Anyway, quite enough of that. That's it for this week. All of our podcast stories taken from the Pod News Daily newsletter at podnews.net.
You can support this show by streaming sats. You can give us feedback using the Buzzsprout fan mail link in our show notes, and you can send us a super comment or a boost, or become a power supporter like the excellent 18 at weekly.podnews.net.
Our music is from TM Studios. Our voiceover is Sheila D. Our audio is recorded using CleanFeed. We edit with Hindenburg, and we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Start podcasting. Keep podcasting.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show. And support us. The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.